Hello friends, I am Mr. Ghost, and I am here to help you today. I know, you use these videos to fall asleep. So, before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I never expected a doorbell to ruin my sleep and make me question my own sanity. When I bought this single-story house, I felt proud. It was in a quiet neighborhood with wide streets, neat lawns and neighbors who nodded politely when I passed by. Everything seemed perfect until that doorbell started ringing at the worst possible hours. I want to share exactly what happened, step by step, because it's still fresh in my mind. I'm a straightforward guy, and I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that. But after living here for a few weeks, I'm not so sure anymore. I moved in on a Saturday morning. My small moving truck arrived and I spent most of the day carrying boxes and arranging furniture. The house had only one floor, which made everything easier. By evening, I was exhausted. I remember sitting on the couch with a bottle of water, looking around at the stacks of boxes that still needed unpacking. The silence felt good. I had chosen this neighborhood because I wanted peace. No traffic noise, no rowdy neighbors, just a nice place to unwind after work. That first night, I slept like a rock. The second day, I woke up early. I carried out more boxes, set up my TV, and did a quick grocery run. Everything felt normal. I even had a brief chat with an older neighbor across the street. He told me the area was safe and calm. He mentioned that people around here respect each other's space and keep to themselves. It sounded ideal. Later that night, around 11 p.m., I was on my couch watching a movie. Suddenly, I heard my doorbell. It was a single ring, short and sharp. I paused the movie and listened. Nothing happened after that. I waited a few seconds, then walked to the door. I opened it slowly. The porch light was on, and I looked out at the driveway. Nothing. No person, no car, not even a stray cat on the lawn. The streetlights cast a pale glow on the road, but I didn't see any movement. My heart rate was normal, and I just assumed it might have been a glitch in the wiring. Maybe the doorbell was old or sensitive to voltage changes. I closed the door, went back to the couch, and finished my movie. I didn't think much about it. The following night, around 2 a.m., I was in bed. I'm a light sleeper, so when the doorbell rang, I woke up immediately. My entire body felt tense and my eyes shot open. The ring was loud in the stillness. I threw off the covers, grabbed a flashlight from my nightstand, and went straight to the front door. Again, I opened it, and again there was no one there. This time, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds listening. I heard crickets and some distant rustling of leaves, but no footsteps, no whispering. Just me in my pajamas, feeling a little ridiculous. I went back inside, made sure the door was locked, and tried to fall back asleep. My mind kept replaying the sound of the doorbell. It was clear, not faint or static. It was the exact same tone the bell makes when someone actually presses the button. I finally drifted off around 3:30. By the end of that week, the doorbell rang 3 more times at odd hours. I tried not to overreact, but it started bothering me. One afternoon, I checked the doorbell button. It looked fine, but I wasn't an electrician. I decided to replace it anyway. The next day, I removed the old button, installed a new one, and tested it. Everything seemed okay. I tightened all connections, wiped the wires clean, and made sure the system was stable. That night, I stayed up late with a cup of coffee, determined to catch whoever might be messing with me. The doorbell didn't ring, so I went to bed around 1 a.m. The following day, nothing happened. I thought maybe the problem was solved. But then, at around 4 a.m. on Tuesday, the bell rang twice in quick succession. It sounded like someone was tapping it. My body reacted instantly. My chest tightened, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. I got out of bed, stumbled a bit in the dark, and reached the door. I swung it open fast, trying to catch whoever was out there. All I saw was my lawn under the faint light of a street lamp. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I flicked on my flashlight and swept it across the grass and bushes. I thought I saw a hint of movement near the edge of the hedge, but it was gone before I could focus. I walked a few steps onto the lawn barefoot, feeling the cold grass under my feet. The street was empty. I looked to both sides and saw only parked cars and silent houses. I shivered from a mix of the chill and the weird feeling that someone was nearby, watching me. Eventually, I went back inside, double-locked the door, and sat at the kitchen table, feeling wide awake. That morning I was tired. I drank strong coffee, trying to keep my eyes open. At work, I found myself distracted. My mind kept going back to that doorbell and the possible reasons behind it. My initial thought was that it could be neighborhood kids playing a prank, but I barely saw any kids around, and it kept happening at strange hours. Also, the footstep sounds were light, almost careful. I told a friend about it, and he said maybe it was an electrical short. I explained that I already replaced the button and checked the wiring. He shrugged and suggested I install a security camera. It sounded like a good idea. The next day, I bought a simple motion-activated camera and set it up to cover my porch. The camera synced with my phone, so I could check live footage and get alerts when something or someone triggered the sensor. I felt relieved. That night, I went to bed early, hoping for a good sleep. Sure enough, around 2:30 a.m., the doorbell rang. My phone chimed at the same moment with a motion detection alert. I jumped out of bed, my heart pounding, and opened the camera feed. It showed the porch, but there was no one there, just the empty view of my front door and yard beyond. I replayed the clip. The motion sensor had gone off, but the video only showed a glimpse of a shadow moving past the edge of the frame. It was so quick and vague that it could have been anything, an animal, a bird, or a person ducking out of sight. But it felt more like a person. I turned on the porch light from my phone app and rushed to the door. Again, no sign of anyone. I started noticing small details that put me on edge. The grass near the hedges looked slightly flattened, as if someone had stood there multiple times. A few times I found a faint footprint in the soil next to the garden bed. It wasn't a heavy print, so it seemed like whoever was there weighed less than me. But I couldn't be sure. I tried to capture more footage on the camera, but nothing conclusive appeared. I even moved the camera to different angles, hoping to catch a clearer view. Sometimes I got the sense that something was intentionally avoiding the camera. One night around 3 a.m., the bell rang again. This time I managed to open the door quickly enough to hear a soft rustling on the grass. It sounded like someone running with caution, trying not to be heard. I yelled, "Who's there?" I didn't expect an answer, and I didn't get one. I shone my flashlight around, but all I saw were the shadows of my shrubs. The street was empty. The houses looked asleep. Lights off, curtains drawn. My stomach was tight, and my breathing was heavy. I stood there for a while, sweat forming on my forehead. I felt exposed, like I was being toyed with. After a minute or two, I went back inside, my hands shaking. Over the next few days, I tried to come up with logical explanations. Maybe it was someone from the neighborhood who had some grudge against the previous owner, or maybe it was just a random prankster. I thought about calling the police, but what would I tell them? That my doorbell rings a few times at night and I have blurry camera footage of a possible shadow. I wasn't sure they'd do much about it. Still, I decided to mention it to the neighbor who lived to my right, a middle-aged guy who seemed friendly. He said he hadn't seen or heard anything unusual and wished me luck. I didn't get the feeling he was hiding anything. He just genuinely didn't know. Things took a stranger turn the following week. The doorbell started ringing more frequently, sometimes 2 or 3 times a night. One evening I was in my living room, and the bell rang at 10 p.m. That wasn't a weird time, so I figured it might be a friend visiting or a neighbor. I opened the door, but again, no one was there. The air felt still. There was a faint smell of freshly cut grass, but otherwise nothing stood out. I stepped outside and called out. No response, no footsteps, just me, feeling that same uneasy sensation. My shoulders felt tense, and I rubbed my neck, trying to calm myself. I couldn't sleep well after that. My nights blurred together, filled with short bursts of sleep, broken by the piercing sound of the doorbell. My back ached from jumping out of bed so often. I felt groggy in the mornings. At work, I made mistakes on simple tasks because I was so tired. When people asked if I was all right, I just shrugged and muttered something about having trouble sleeping in a new place. I didn't want to sound like I was scared of a doorbell, but that's exactly what I was becoming. One Thursday night around midnight, I decided to stay up and watch the camera feed in real time. I had a thermos of coffee and my phone on the kitchen table. I sat in near silence, only the faint hum of the refrigerator buzzing behind me. My eyes felt heavy, but I forced them open. Finally, I heard the doorbell. Immediately, I looked down at my phone. The live view showed a faint blur near the edge of my yard, almost like a flicker of movement. I rushed to the front door. As soon as I opened it, I heard those same light footsteps fading into the darkness. I ran out shouting, "Stop!" My voice cracked from the tension in my throat. I heard rustling in the hedge, but by the time I reached it, there was nothing there. It was like chasing a ghost. My body felt electric with frustration. I could still feel my pulse in my neck. After that, I installed additional lighting around the front of the house. I put floodlights in the corners of the yard. I added another camera facing the driveway. At that point, my house started looking like a mini fortress, which was ironic because I moved to this neighborhood for its peace and safety. The extra lights made me feel a bit better, but they also cast new shadows that played tricks on my eyes. Every time I saw movement in my peripheral vision, my chest would tighten. Most of the time, it was just the wind moving branches. The doorbell kept ringing. It didn't matter if the lights were on or off. It happened at 1 a.m., 3 a.m., or sometimes just after midnight. It wasn't constant, but frequent enough that I felt constantly on edge. There was a night when it rang 4 times. Each time I went to check the yard and found it empty. That same night I went outside right after the 3rd ring and hid behind my car, waiting. I crouched there in the dark with a flashlight in one hand and my phone in the other. After a few minutes of silence, the doorbell rang again. My heart pounded. I jumped up and sprinted to the front porch, but as usual, there was no one. It was so frustrating that I nearly yelled in anger. At this point, I was sure there was a person behind it. No, electrical glitch would cause random footsteps or faint shadows on the camera footage. My best guess was that someone was deliberately messing with me. But why? I had done nothing to anyone in this neighborhood. I barely knew anyone's names. Maybe someone was bored, or maybe someone wanted me to leave. I found myself double-checking my locks at all times. My windows stayed shut even on warm nights. I started jumping at small sounds like the ice maker in the freezer, or a tree branch scraping the roof. One night, I realized I had enough. It was around 3:30 a.m. The bell rang, and I leaped out of bed, heart racing, sweat on my temples. I stormed to the door, opened it, and shouted, "I don't know who you are, but stop." My voice echoed into the stillness. I felt the cool night air on my skin. Then I heard those faint footsteps retreating. I slammed the door and stood there breathing heavily. My throat felt dry. I leaned on the wall and closed my eyes. I was just a man who wanted to sleep in peace. And yet I was living in a nightly cat and mouse game with an invisible prankster or something else I couldn't understand. Even now, as I tell this story, I don't have a neat conclusion. The doorbell keeps ringing. Some nights it's just once. Other nights it's multiple times. I've gotten used to it in a strange way, but it still drains me. Every time the bell sounds, my muscles tense and my brain jolts awake. I open the door. I see nothing. I hear distant, quiet steps or a rustle of grass. Then nothing more. I don't see any face. I don't hear any voice. It's just me on an empty porch in the wide, silent street. I wish I had answers, but I don't. I wonder if it's going to escalate or if it will just stop. Until then, I keep the cameras rolling and the lights on. My hope is that one day I'll find out who or what is behind this. Until that happens, I live in a quiet neighborhood where my doorbell rings at night for no reason I can explain. And that's the reality I'm stuck with. I never liked that corridor at my workplace. It's long, narrow, and almost always empty. The first time I walked through it alone, the lights on the ceiling felt too dim. My eyes strained to see the end of it. Even during the day, that place seemed stuck in a permanent dusk. A slight draft brushed my arms, making my skin crawl. I felt uncomfortable right away, but tried to ignore it. I told myself it was just a normal hallway leading to a storage room that nobody used very often. Nothing special, nothing weird, but I couldn't shake the tension in my chest whenever I was there. It felt like someone was watching, even though I didn't see anyone around. That was just the start. Over time, that corridor showed me things I can't explain in logical terms. I can only describe exactly what happened and how it felt. I work in a building with several different sections. My department is near the front, with wide windows and bright lighting. The corridor in question is in the back, connecting to a small storage room for old supplies. Most employees rarely need anything from there, so they don't visit that area much. My boss told me to grab some cleaning materials one afternoon, because the janitorial staff had run out. I remember rolling my eyes a bit because I didn't want to walk all the way to the back. But I did it. I pushed open the heavy door leading from the main hallway into the narrower one, and that door always made a sharp creak, like the hinges needed oil. On the other side, the light was weak. Two fluorescent bulbs flickered in the ceiling. The floor was made of cheap tiles, and my footsteps made a dull, hollow sound. I was halfway down when I felt a sudden gust of air rush by me. I remember blinking a few times trying to figure out where that air could have come from. The corridor had no windows, but the single ventilation grate near the top of the wall usually let out a slow trickle of stale air. This gust felt much stronger, making my hair move around my forehead. I saw the side doors lining the corridor shut as the air passed. There were 3 doors in a row on the left side. I heard 2 loud bangs from that direction almost at the same time, and my heart lurched. I stood there trying to see if someone had opened a door, but everything looked locked. Those doors were used for electrical panels in old maintenance closets, which always had padlocks or thick deadbolts. I walked over to check the first door. Jiggling the handle, it didn't budge. I tried the second, same thing, locked tight. I didn't hear anyone else around, so I stood there in silence. I can't say I felt actual fear at that moment. It was more confusion. I wondered if there was some weird wind tunnel effect in the hallway. Maybe something with the ventilation. I shrugged it off and continued to the storage room at the end. I used my key, stepped inside, grabbed the cleaning supplies, and left. The return trip was quiet. Nothing banged. No more gusts. But when I got back to my department, a coworker asked if I felt a chill. I guess my face looked pale. I told him I was fine. I didn't want to share those details and sound paranoid. Over the next few days, I had to walk through that corridor a couple of times more. Usually I prefer to go with someone else. But people were busy, and I didn't feel like waiting around. Each time I noticed faint tapping sounds, I would step in, hear my shoes squeak on the tile, and then catch a quick knock coming from behind one of the locked doors. It wasn't loud. It sounded like someone lightly hitting the door from inside. I tried to ignore it. But the knocks became frequent whenever I walked alone. Sometimes there was a stronger thud, followed by a brief echo. My stomach would tighten, and my breathing would get shallow. I caught myself walking faster to reach the storage room. On the way back, I would hurry again. My back felt tense, like my muscles were ready to react if something jumped out at me. Nobody else in my office complained about it. I asked a few people if they ever heard weird knocking or banging sounds in that back hallway. One person said they noticed the air was musty and the lighting was terrible, but they never heard anything unusual. Another coworker said she sometimes heard a door slam once, but she assumed it was someone else using the losets. I didn't feel reassured. I started to wonder if I was more sensitive to noises, or if the corridor reacted more when I passed by. That thought made me uneasy. I tried to stay logical. I told myself it was just old building issues, the structure settling, old vents causing pressure changes and so on. But logic didn't calm my nerves when I stood in that corridor alone. One afternoon, I had to bring some heavy boxes of paper to the storage room. I used a small cart with wheels. The corridor was empty as usual, and the lights flickered. My footsteps echoed, and the cart's wheels squeaked in a high-pitched way. As I got closer to the middle section where the side doors were, I heard a loud bang. It echoed once. My chest tightened. The cart bumped against the wall because I flinched. I stared at the door on the left, the second one in the row. My hands shook slightly. I waited, not sure what to do. Another bang came from the same door. It sounded forceful, like someone was on the other side hitting it with an open palm. My heart pounded. I walked over to that door, placing one hand on the cold metal handle. It was locked as always. I twisted the knob, pulled, pushed, tried to see if it would move. Nothing. The padlock was still in place. The door looked solid. I listened for a moment, no more noise. My stomach felt cramped. I swallowed hard and let go of the handle. Then I grabbed the cart and pushed it to the storage room, ignoring my sweaty palms. I loaded the boxes into the closet quickly and rushed out. When I mentioned this incident to a coworker I trust, he just shrugged. He told me he never heard anything. He suggested I might be stressed or tired. I told him I was sure I heard banging. He nodded politely, but his face said he didn't believe me. I felt isolated. I decided to see if I could record something. The next time I had to go down there, I opened the voice recorder app on my phone. I walked slowly, letting the microphone capture every sound. My breathing was a bit louder than normal because of my tension, but I hoped I might catch the knocks or bangs that kept happening. That day nothing happened. Silence. No wind. No banging. No echoes. I felt foolish, like I was trying to prove a ghost story. I turned off the recorder and left. But 2 days later, I had to pass through the corridor again. This time, I decided not to bother with the phone. I walked in and right away I heard a scraping noise near the first locked door on my left. It sounded like metal against metal. My heart rate rose, but I forced myself to check the door. The handle was firm, and the lock was intact. I pressed my ear against the door. I heard a faint rustling. It reminded me of cloth or paper sliding across the floor. I know that sounds vague, but it sounded like something moving slowly. I stepped back and my chest tightened. My thoughts were simple. This is messed up. I shouldn't be here right now. I hurried to the storage room, grabbed what I needed, and got out fast. When I closed the heavy door behind me on the way back to the main hallway, I let out a long exhale. My coworker in the supply area saw the tension in my face and asked if I was okay. I just nodded and walked to my desk. For the rest of the day, I felt on edge. My shoulders were tight, and I kept replaying the noise in my head. Eventually, I asked our building maintenance guy Tony about the locked doors. He said those closets contain old circuit breakers, some cleaning equipment, and a few leftover items from previous tenants. He said the padlocks are there because nobody needs to go in often, and management prefers to keep them secured. When I asked if he ever heard banging or scraping, he just stared at me. He said he sometimes hears weird sounds from the ventilation system, but nothing like what I described. He offered to walk down there with me to check it out, but we never found a convenient time that day. I admit, I kept delaying because I was nervous about what might happen. A few days after that, I was staying late to finish some reports. The office was quiet. Most people had already left. My boss asked me to bring some old files to the storage room at the back. I didn't want to walk through that corridor at night, but I also didn't want to refuse. I tried to keep my mind steady. I grabbed the files, stacked them in a box, and headed down. The lights in the corridor flickered more than usual, or maybe I just noticed it more because the entire office was dim. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. The corridor was silent for the first few steps. I passed the first door. Nothing. I passed the second door and I felt a light tap behind me. I spun around, pointing my phone's flashlight at the door. It was still shut and locked. I faced forward again and kept going. A sudden gust of air rushed past me, causing my tie to flip over my shoulder. The doors rattled, and I heard one of them slam loudly. The echo bounced down the corridor. My chest felt tight, and my scalp prickled. I wanted to run, but I also felt a strange urge to see if something was behind me. I turned around slowly, shining my phone's light at each door. The second door in the row banged again, but it didn't open. The handle shook for a moment. I stood there frozen, with my arm outstretched and my flashlight trembling because my hand was shaking. My breaths were short, and my mouth felt dry. I inched backward, not looking away from that door. Then I heard another slam from the third door. That one also stayed locked. My legs felt weak, and my palms were slick with sweat. I kept telling myself it had to be wind or air pressure changes, but that explanation felt flimsy, especially at night. I forced my legs to move, never taking my eyes off the doors until I reached the storage room. I fumbled with the keys, dropped them, then picked them up. My fingers felt numb. I unlocked the storage room door and went inside. I set the files down, closed the door behind me, and leaned against it. My heart pounded so hard that I could feel my chest throbbing. Inside the storage room, the air smelled stale. The only sound was my heavy breathing. I wiped my forehead with the back of my hand. I didn't linger. I stepped back out into the corridor after a minute, determined to get out of there as fast as possible. I kept my phone in my hand with the flashlight on. I moved quickly, but I didn't run. My chest felt constricted and I had a small tremor in my arms. The corridor was quiet for a few steps. Then, right before I reached the door back to the main hallway, I heard one final bang from behind me. It wasn't as loud as before, but it echoed in the still air. I swallowed hard and kept walking. I yanked open the heavy door, stepped through, and shut it behind me. My breath came out in a rush, and I felt goosebumps all over my arms. After that night, I decided to avoid going back there alone unless absolutely necessary. I told my boss it would be better if 2 people always handled tasks in the back hallway. He didn't see any problem with that. He assumed I was just being cautious about carrying heavy items or dealing with old shelving. I didn't mention the doors banging or the gusts of air again. I didn't want more strange looks. Still, I catch myself thinking about it whenever I'm near that side of the building. My neck gets tense and my stomach flips. I can't shake the idea that there's something in that corridor that responds to me. I don't know if it's responding to fear, curiosity, or my presence specifically. Nobody else hears it the way I do. That bothers me. It's like there's an active force there, and I can't explain it. I have no proof. I never got a clear recording. I don't have any photos or videos that show anything. All I have are my memories of those slams, the sound of locked doors rattling and that constant feeling of being watched. My body reacts in a very real way. Racing heart, sweaty hands, shaky legs. That tells me you're not imagining things. Something happens in that corridor, and it happens more often when I'm alone. Maybe it's a quirk of the building design or a faulty air duct that no one else has noticed. Or maybe there's more going on. Either way, I try to stay away from it. I focus on my job, do my work near the front, and let those closets remain locked. Still, whenever I have to go back there, I prepare myself. My stomach clenches, and my mind races with the memory of those door handles rattling. I'm always waiting for that next bang, or the time I felt a rush of air push past me with no explanation. I don't know if anyone else will ever experience it the same way. But it's real to me, and it's enough to keep me cautious. I keep the corridor's door closed whenever possible. I ask someone to come with me if I need to retrieve supplies. I don't know if that solves anything, but at least I don't feel alone in there. The tension in my chest is still there, but it's more manageable when I have backup. That's all there is to tell. I don't have a grand conclusion. I haven't figured out the cause, but I know what I've heard and felt. And if anyone else ever mentions hearing locked doors bang or feeling a sudden gust of air in that corridor, I'll leave them right away. Last Tuesday night, I was sitting in our small studio, staring at a dark screen while waiting for a video project to render. My back hurt because I'd been hunched over the desk for hours. I heard a dull pop from somewhere behind me. I turned around fast. The amplifier's LED was flashing in the corner of my eye. I blinked a few times trying to make sense of it. The amplifier was unplugged. I remember feeling a quick shot of adrenaline in my chest. My arms felt stiff, and my breath got shallow. I stood up and stared at that little LED until it went dark again. I didn't say anything out loud because my friend was asleep on the futon we keep in the corner. But my hands were shaking when I reached over to turn on the overhead light. Nothing else was on, so the flick of that switch lit the room with a dull, warm glow. I stood there for another few seconds, waiting to see if the amplifier would light up again. It stayed quiet. That was the exact moment I decided we might have a problem in this place. I share this studio with my friend Marcus. It's not a fancy setup. We have a wooden desk that holds a computer tower, 2 monitors, some audio gear, and a small mixing console. We keep an amplifier on a metal stand in the back corner connected to a pair of speakers. There's also an audio monitor we sometimes use when recording guitar tracks. The room is cramped. The walls have some cheap foam panels we stuck on with adhesive strips. There's a small window high on the wall, but it barely lets in any light. The floor is concrete with a thin rug over it, and we have an old futon for power naps. It gets stuffy at night, but we don't keep the door open because the hallway light bothers us. We often work until 3 or 4 in the morning. A week ago, we started noticing weird stuff. I'd come in, sit down, and see that the mixing console's lights were on. The knobs for volume and gain would be lit, like we had them powered up, but nothing was plugged in. I'd think, okay, maybe I forgot to turn it off. Then realized the main switch on the power strip was down. Sometimes the audio monitor would hiss or crackle like a cable was loose. I checked the cables over and over. No issues. The next day, Marcus walked in and said the amplifier was on when he arrived, even though he was sure he turned everything off the night before. At first, I wrote it off as some short circuit or grounding error. I figured maybe the building had an issue with the wiring. The place is old, and the landlord is cheap. I didn't feel too spooked. Just annoyed. I don't like messing with electricity problems because they can be a pain to fix. But that night, which I mentioned at the start, the night I actually saw the amplifier's LED come on without any power cord connected, that changed my perspective. I wasn't thinking about faulty wiring anymore. I thought I might be hallucinating. I checked the amplifier's power cable. It was coiled on the floor, not attached to the amplifier or the wall socket. The red LED was shining. Then it blinked a few times and I heard a faint pop from the speaker. I noticed my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I was sweaty, but the AC was on. My mouth went dry and I stood there afraid to move closer. I felt a chill run over my arms. The LED went off, and I heard a soft click. I shook my head, trying to figure out a rational explanation. Maybe there was some residual charge left in the unit, but that pop was too loud for leftover electricity. Also, it blinked more than once. I couldn't explain it. I stayed quiet the rest of the night. I didn't wake up Marcos. He's been stressed lately. We have a couple of clients waiting for a music video edit, and we're already behind schedule. I didn't want to freak him out more than he already was, so I went back to my computer, stared at the timeline in my editing software, and tried to ignore the odd tension in the room. Every few minutes, I glanced over at the amplifier to see if it would do anything else. It stayed off. The stillness felt heavy. My shoulders ached from sitting there, but I pushed through until around 3 a.m. Then I got up, turned off the computer, and threw a blanket over myself on the futon next to Marcos. The next morning, I told him what happened. I expected him to laugh or say I was sleep deprived. Instead, he got quiet, stared at the amplifier, walked over to it, and touched the power button. It didn't do anything, obviously, because it wasn't plugged in. Then he said he'd heard strange pops from the speakers a few days ago, when the main power strip was off. He didn't see any lights, but he heard distinct thumps like someone tapping the speaker cones. He looked worried. That's unusual for him. Marcos is always calm, even in weird situations, but he said he wanted to get the place blessed. I raised an eyebrow, but I didn't argue. I told him that if it made him feel better, go for it. We left it at that. That same day, we had a bunch of editing to finish. We cranked up some background music on our headphones, so we could focus. Around noon, I pulled off my headphones because I heard a hissing sound. It was coming from the audio monitor on the desk. Its power light wasn't on, but the speaker was producing a static hiss. Marcos and I both leaned in and listened. I flipped the power switch on the monitor back and forth just to see if that would stop the noise. The noise stopped when I turned it on for real, then started again when I turned it off. That was completely backward from how it should behave. Off should mean off, but it was making noise only when off. Marcos and I just looked at each other.
He said, "Dude, this is messed up."
I sighed and pulled the plug from the back of the monitor. The hiss continued for about 5 seconds, then stopped abruptly. It felt like we were both holding our breath, waiting for it to start again. It didn't. We went back to editing, but neither of us could fully concentrate. My mind kept drifting toward that strange noise. Later that afternoon, I decided to test every cable and piece of gear in the studio. I plugged them in one at a time, turned them on, and listened. Nothing abnormal happened when the power strips were on. Everything worked as usual. We recorded a short guitar riff, played it back, and the monitors were clear. The amplifier was fine. The mixing console displayed normal behavior. We tested the outlets with a small tester I borrowed from a neighbor who's an electrician. It showed normal wiring. The ground pin was functioning. No reversed polarity, no open ground. Everything checked out. Yet at night, with the main power off, we kept experiencing those random lights and pops. By Thursday, Marcos started having trouble sleeping. He said he kept dreaming the equipment was turning on by itself, and that he'd wake up with the sense someone was watching him. I believed him because I was losing sleep too. I stayed up until 2 or 3 a.m. every day waiting for something to happen, then jumped at every tiny sound in the room. I tried listening with headphones on, but that only made things worse because I'd imagine hearing noises from behind me. My neck felt stiff all the time. My eyes burned from lack of rest. One night, I stepped out into the hallway to grab water from the cooler near the elevator. The hallway lights flickered a bit, but that's normal for this building. I was heading back to the studio when I heard a muffled pop from behind the closed door. My stomach clenched and I walked faster. When I got inside, Marcos was standing in the middle of the room holding a flashlight. He looked at me and said, "The console lights were blinking, man. The things aren't even plugged in." He shined the flashlight toward the desk, and I saw the console's channel indicators flickering on and off. That flicker stopped the moment I stepped closer. Marcos put the flashlight down and exhaled loudly. I felt goosebumps on my arms. We decided to unplug everything from everywhere. No cables were connected to the walls, no surge protectors, nothing. We laid each cable on the rug, then turned off all the lights except the one overhead bulb. We sat there, staring at the gear in silence. The only sound was the hum of the AC unit from the corner. We waited for a long time. After about half an hour, I started feeling foolish. I said, "Look, Maybe we're overreacting. Marcos shrugged and said, I'm not imagining those pops, man. I didn't have a good response. Eventually we went back to plugging in the essentials so we could continue working. We spent another sleepless night editing videos and scanning the room for odd behavior. The next day my lower back felt sore and my head felt heavy. Marcos was complaining of a headache. We kept snapping at each other over small editing details. The tension in that tiny space was thick, and we were short-tempered because of the stress. While Marcos was adjusting color grades on a project, I was at the other computer scanning online forums for any hint about electronic gear powering on by itself. I found a few threads about faulty capacitors or leftover charges in certain devices, but nothing that matched what we were seeing. Most people said once a device is unplugged, there's no reason for it to flash its LEDs or make consistent popping sounds. A single pop from a capacitor discharging might happen, but not repeated flickers or multiple pops spaced out by minutes. That evening, we had to finish a client's project, so we pulled a long shift. Around midnight, a dull thump came from the speakers. Then the amplifier light turned on and stayed on for 3 seconds. Marcos and I both froze. My heart was pounding, my hands felt clammy, and my mouth was dry. I tried to walk toward the amplifier to see if I could hear anything else. Halfway there, the light went off. The mixing console flicked on for a second, its little green lights dancing. Marcos muttered under his breath and backed away. I reached out to the power strip to double-check it was off. It was. No cables were running to the sockets on that side of the room. A twisting sensation occurred in my stomach, and my pulse was rapid. I took a breath trying to steady my nerves. I heard Marcos whisper, "This is insane." He grabbed his phone and started filming. The gear stayed dark. He recorded for a few minutes, but nothing happened. Finally, he stopped and said, "I'm calling my aunt tomorrow. She knows someone who can bless places." I just nodded. I didn't tease him. I wanted something to change. Working in that room was draining us. It wasn't just about seeing lights and hearing pops. It was the feeling that something wasn't right. My body felt tense all the time. Even when nothing was happening, I was on edge. The next day, Marcos made a few calls. He said someone could come the following week to do a simple blessing or cleansing ritual. We both felt a little relieved, but we still had to survive the weekend. We continued working on our projects. We did our best to ignore the occasional hiss or click from the speakers. We turned up our music while editing, trying to drown out the small noises in the background. On Saturday night, I was alone in the studio. Marcos went home to catch up on sleep and get some personal things done. I sat at the desk finalizing a video edit when I heard a faint crackle behind me. It sounded like static coming from the mixing console. I turned around and saw the console's lights dancing briefly, then going dark. My skin tingled. I felt my face getting hot and then cold. I took a deep breath and stood up, deciding I'd had enough for one night. I saved my progress, turned off the computer, and started gathering my things. Then the amplifier's LED lit up right in front of me, blinking 3 times in a steady rhythm. I froze. I felt my ears ringing and my temples throbbing. I remembered my breath getting shaky. I quietly said, "Nope, I'm out." I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I grabbed my backpack and left the studio in a rush. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I'd seen. There was no logical reason for an unplugged amplifier to blink like that. I felt exhausted, but my mind wouldn't shut down. The next day, I messaged Marcos and he told me he was serious about bringing someone to cleanse the place. I said, "Yes, do it. I'm not going back there alone at night until that happens." We still had a lot of work to do, so on Monday we showed up again. We tried to keep busy in the daylight. The gear acted normally for most of the afternoon. We even joked around a bit, saying maybe we'd just been hallucinating from lack of sleep. But as soon as the sun went down, the mood in the studio changed. Would hear the occasional hiss or pop from a corner of the room. The overhead light felt too dim. Both of us kept scanning the walls and floor for signs of movement. At one point, the desk lamp flickered. Marcos smacked it with his palm and it stopped. Probably just a loose bulb. But it didn't help our nerves. By midnight, our eyes were heavy, and our bodies felt sore from tension and long hours of work. I was editing the final cut of a video, trying to ignore every little pop in the background. Marcos had his back to me, listening to a recorded track on headphones. We kept going until around 2 a.m., at which point we agreed we'd had enough. We shut down the computers, and I watched Marcus unplug the gear from the wall sockets. Then we turned off the lights. The studio was pitch black, except for the faint glow of the hallway coming under the door. I moved to open the door, and I heard that distinct pop from the amplifier's speaker. My stomach lurched. I flicked the light switch back on, half expecting to see the LED lit up. The amplifier's light was dark. I felt a dull ache in my chest from holding my breath too long. Marcus just mumbled, "Let's go." Now we're waiting for that person to come and do the blessing. We haven't told our landlord because we don't think he'd care or believe us. We still have a few more editing jobs this week, and we're pushing through. We try to work during the day as much as possible. Whenever we stay late, we keep the lights on and avoid looking at the gear too much. We just focus on the screen, the music, and the tasks at hand. But every time I hear a small crackle or see a flicker of light in my peripheral vision, my heart speeds up. My palms get damp, and I feel that little jolt in my gut. I can't deny it. Something is off about that studio. I don't know if it's the wiring, some bizarre electrical problem, or something else entirely. All I know is that the equipment keeps acting like it's alive at the worst moments. Marcus and I aren't sleeping well. I'm on edge, and so is he. For now, we're just hoping that when the blessing happens, it puts an end to this. If it doesn't, I'm not sure what else we can do. We can't afford to move, and we rely on this space for our work. So, I'm here, typing out these details, waiting for the next time the amplifier or monitor decides to show me it's not really off. And every time it happens, I feel my chest tighten, my breath catch, and I wonder if I'm losing my mind. I guess he'll find out soon enough. I never expected a single room to make me feel so uneasy. The day I got the keys to this old studio, I walked in with a sense of relief and excitement. I was on a tight budget, so I needed a cheap place. And this seemed perfect at first. The previous owner told me about the humidity problem in the living room wall, especially during the winter. He mentioned some occasional damp spots. He suggested keeping the windows open sometimes and wiping down any water stains when they appeared. I thought it sounded annoying but manageable. My first night there was uneventful. The walls looked dingy in certain areas, but I didn't see anything alarming. I put my mattress on the floor, set up a lamp, and unpacked a few boxes. The place smelled musty, like it hadn't been aired out in a long time. I made a mental note to buy a dehumidifier. That seemed like a good solution. I just wanted to get comfortable. I remember telling myself it would feel like home after a few days of cleaning and organizing. Within the first week, I noticed small spots of moisture on the living room wall. They were about the size of my hand, scattered in patches. I wiped them with a towel, then left the window open for a few hours to help things dry. The spots disappeared, and I didn't think much about them. But a few days later, I woke up to a bigger problem. There was a sizable patch of discoloration in the same area. It was faint but looked like an uneven shadow on the wall. I touched it and felt a slight chill. My hand came away damp, and there was a weird tingling in my fingertips. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just cold water seeping through. Over the next few weeks, I patched up small cracks and sealed some areas where I thought water might be getting in. I bought sealant and spent several afternoons applying it around the edges of the living room window. I climbed up on a ladder, checked the gutters outside as much as I could from my position, and tried to see if there were any obvious leaks in the roof. I didn't notice anything major. I thought maybe the old construction just trapped moisture. The walls were thick, and the place had this constant damp smell. Sometimes I found water droplets on the window frame in the morning, but it wasn't too bad. Then the big stain appeared. One cold evening, I came home from work later than usual. I opened the door, flicked on the overhead light, and saw it. There was a large dark patch on the living room wall. I stood there staring at it. It stretched vertically, almost from my waist to above my head. It looked like a person facing sideways with what seemed like a shoulder and a slight curve where a head might be. It freaked me out, but I tried to stay calm. I told myself it was just the moisture forming a random shape. Still, I felt my heart race. I walked closer and tried to see if there was any mold or something else. It felt damp to the touch, but didn't feel slimy or rotten. It was just wet. I grabbed my phone and took a few pictures, but in the photos it just looked like a vague stain. We couldn't see a defined outline or anything like that. I noticed a strange heaviness in the air. The room felt quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was more like someone else was standing there watching me. I kept glancing over my shoulder, checking the door, looking at the corners of the room. My breathing sped up and my hands felt clammy. I left the lights on and opened the window a crack. I told myself it was just my imagination. I wiped the stain down with an old towel. The towel got damp and I tossed it into a corner. When I looked back at the wall, the stain had faded a little. Over the next few hours it gradually disappeared. By bedtime, there was no sign of it. The wall looked normal except for a faint watermark. I tried to sleep, but kept tossing and turning. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that outline again. The next morning, I checked the wall first thing. There was only a slight discoloration. It didn't look like a person anymore, just a vague patch. I went about my day, went to work and tried to forget about it. But over the following days, I started noticing a pattern. The stain would appear in the late afternoon or evening, usually when the weather was cold or damp outside. It didn't always form the same shape, but it often looked vaguely like a body. Sometimes it was smaller, sometimes bigger. I attempted to record a video, but the camera never captured the exact shape I was seeing. On the screen, it just looked like an irregular wet patch. One night, I decided to sit on the couch and watch the wall. I turned off the TV and most of the lights, leaving only a small lamp near me. I waited. After about an hour, I saw a wet spot forming in the middle of the wall. It started small, no bigger than my hand. Then it spread slowly, expanding to the left and then upward, as if water was seeping through an invisible outline. My chest felt tight. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry. I couldn't stop watching it. My palms were sweaty, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I had this strange urge to speak out loud, but I didn't know what to say. My mind was racing, but I kept telling myself it was just water. It wasn't anything else. Still, my body felt tense, as if I were in danger. As the patch grew, I thought I saw a shoulder shape on the top right side. It was like a slope, with a rounded section that could be a head. My heart was pounding. I started counting in my head just to calm down. I heard the clock ticking in the kitchen and the faint hum of the mini fridge. I could hear my own breathing, loud and uneven. I realized I was clutching the couch cushion hard enough to make my knuckles hurt. I got up, walked over to the wall, and placed my hand on the center of the stain. My palm felt cold, and the wall almost seemed to shiver under my touch. I jerked my hand away. That freaked me out even more. I looked down and saw droplets of water on my hand. They weren't thick or discolored, just regular water. After a few minutes, the stain started to fade like it always did, and it disappeared completely in another hour. Then, the atmosphere felt lighter again. I could breathe more easily, and my muscles relaxed. I started to obsess over the possibility of a hidden leak. I called a plumber and asked him to check the pipes. He came by a few days later, banged on the walls, checked the bathroom, and inspected the kitchen area. He said he didn't see any obvious issues. He pointed out some old pipes that might sweat in cold weather, but he didn't think they were causing a massive leak. He told me to keep an eye on it and maybe hire someone to check the walls from the outside if it got worse. I also tried using a dehumidifier. I left it running in the living room overnight. In the morning, the water tank was half full, which seemed normal. The next few nights, the stain appeared again, but it was smaller. It didn't have the same defined shape. I felt relieved. I thought maybe the dehumidifier was solving the issue. But then, on a particularly cold evening, I came home and found a giant silhouette on the wall. It was bigger than before. The outline reached almost to the ceiling, and the bottom edge stretched down near the floor. The air smelled damp, and I felt a chill on my skin. I snapped a few more photos. Again, they didn't capture what I was seeing with my own eyes. That night, I felt restless. I walked around the living room, opening and closing the window, turning lamps on and off, and pacing back and forth. My heart was racing, and I couldn't calm down. The place felt stifling, like there wasn't enough oxygen. I opened the front door for a moment just to let fresh air in. I stood there looking at the hallway outside, feeling like I wanted to escape. My hands were shaking. I almost left to go for a walk, but I didn't want to leave the apartment with that shape on the wall. I felt compelled to watch it, as if I needed to make sure it wouldn't do anything. I realized how bizarre that sounded in my own head, so I tried to distract myself. I turned on a podcast, sat in the kitchen, drank some water, and scrolled through my phone, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the wall. When I walked back into the living room, the shape was fading. I watched as the darker areas grew lighter. The top part, where I thought I saw a head, vanished first. Then the rest slowly disappeared. leaving a slight dampness on the paint. The atmosphere lifted again, and I felt my shoulders relax. I felt almost silly for my reaction. I thought maybe I was just stressed out and my mind was playing tricks on me. But it still bothered me that the stain took on such a distinct form. Over the following days, I tried to be more proactive about repairs. I bought more sealant, patched up every crack I could find, and even painted a water-resistant coating on that section of the wall. It reduced the general dampness, but the strange silhouette kept appearing. It always happened on colder, wetter days, usually in the late afternoon or after dark. I started leaving the living room lights on even when I wasn't home, just so I wouldn't walk into a dark room and see that shape looming on the wall. My electricity bill went up, but I didn't care. I tried to talk to a neighbor about it. He said he'd lived in this building for years and had never heard of anything like that. He told me the walls in these apartments sometimes leaked, but he'd never seen a damp spot that came and went so quickly. His place had some mold issues in the past, and he showed me pictures on his phone of black spots near his ceiling, but that looked different from what I was seeing. My stains never had mold or mildew. They didn't smell rotten. It was always just water, but it shaped itself in a way that unnerved me. One day, I decided to record a time-lapse video. I set up my phone on a small tripod, pointing it at the wall. I left it running for 2 hours while I sat on the couch, trying not to move too much. I kept the lights on low. I watched the stain appear on the wall, grow, and then fade away. When I played back the footage, I could see the patch expanding, but it looked more random in the video. It didn't look so much like a silhouette. The edges were uneven, and the shape changed in weird ways. It didn't appear human-like at all. Yet, in person, I was sure it looked like a figure. This contradiction messed with my head. I tried to remain logical. I wrote notes in a small notebook: times, temperatures, humidity levels, how large the stain was, and how long it took to vanish. I thought maybe I could find a pattern or reason behind it. My notes showed that it happened more often when it was cold and wet outside. The shape usually lasted around 1 to 2 hours. It faded faster if I opened the window. Sometimes it left behind a faint watermark that dried by the next morning. Despite my attempts to keep things scientific, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in that room. Whenever the stain appeared, the hair on my arm stood up and my stomach tensed. I felt my pulse pounding in my neck. My breathing went shallow, and I kept glancing around as if I expected someone to be standing behind me. When the shape disappeared, the tension left with it. It felt like stepping out of a cramped elevator into fresh air. I never heard any voices or saw anything move on its own. The doors didn't slam by themselves and the windows didn't rattle. Everything else seemed normal, but that wet patch on the wall was enough to unsettle me every time. I tried ignoring it, but that made me feel more anxious because I knew it was still there, quietly spreading in my peripheral vision. I tried confronting it by standing right in front of it, touching it, wiping it down, and even talking out loud to it a few times. That usually just made me feel foolish. The stain would fade on its own schedule no matter what I did. As the weeks passed, I felt exhausted. My sleep quality was terrible because I'd wake up at night thinking I heard dripping water. Sometimes I'd get up and shine a flashlight on the living room wall, half expecting to see a huge shape. Usually there was nothing, or maybe a faint patch, but just the act of checking over and over wore me down. Eventually, I accepted that I might never understand why this was happening. The previous owner had warned me about humidity, but I doubt he knew how strange it could get. I started telling my friends that I had some weird moisture problem. They laughed it off or gave me advice on home repairs.
Nobody took it seriously.
Maybe they assumed I was overreacting. Still, every time that wet silhouette appears, I feel my chest tighten. I feel sweat on my forehead and my throat go dry. I don't think it's harmful. It hasn't damaged the wall beyond a bit of paint discoloration, and it hasn't spread mold, but it unsettles me to the core. It feels like an unwanted guest that shows up whenever the weather turns cold. It hovers in my living room for a while, messing with my nerves, then disappears without a trace. I can prove anything to other people. My photos aren't convincing, and my videos look like normal water stains. I can't prove that the shape has a human outline. It's all in the eye of the beholder.
I guess.
I'm doing my best to live with it. Some nights I manage to ignore it and just watch TV or listen to music, letting the noise fill the space. Other nights I can take my eyes off the wall. I'm always waiting for that damp silhouette to appear. Even if I don't see it, I imagine it creeping across the white surface, forming the slope of a shoulder or the curve of a head. I've thought about moving out, but I can't afford to break my lease right now. So, I try to fix what I can and clean up after the water. The place is still my home, even if it sometimes feels like I'm sharing it with something else. That's the reality I'm in. No dramatic events, no big discoveries. Just me, this old studio, and a recurring damp shape on the wall that comes and goes as it pleases. I can't explain it, but I have to deal with it. And each time it appears, I stand there feeling that heaviness in the air, waiting for it to fade, and hoping I can sleep without jumping at every sound. That's my life here, and that's all there is to it. I remember the first time I felt that grip on my shoulder. It was firm, like a real hand pressing down with clear intention. That moment changed the way I walk home, and the way I feel about that abandoned parking lot near my building. Before that night, I only thought of the place as an eyesore that saved me a few minutes on my route. Now I feel like something is always lurking behind me when I'm there. I can shake the sensation, and I'm tired of jumping at every sound I hear. But I also can't deny that a part of me needs to keep cutting through that lot. It's just more convenient, and maybe I'm not ready to admit I'm scared. My building is about 2 blocks from the main street. Most people walk around the block because there's a fence around this old parking lot, and the gates are open only on one side. There's a gap in the fence where some of the bars are bent, and I slip through that space to save myself a little time. The lot must have been built decades ago. It has yellow lines on the ground that are almost faded, and most of the pavement is cracked. Weeds poke out near the edges. The walls surrounding it are streaked with peeling paint, and the overhead lights flicker or sometimes stay off completely. At night, the few lights that still work pulse like they're about to die. We used to walk through there without any second thought. I'd come home from the store, or maybe get back late from a friend's place, and I'd duck through the fence if I wanted to shave off a few minutes. The place looked deserted all the time, with no cars parked there anymore. The property owner must have given up on it years ago. I'd walk quickly, head down, not really paying attention to anything except my phone or the ground in front of me. The broken asphalt and random junk on the pavement could trip you if you're not looking. I remember seeing a few old tires, bits of metal, sometimes fast food wrappers, the smell of stagnant water hanging around if it rained. When it was dry, there was just the musty odor of the pavement and the dumpsters in the back. On that night, I was coming home a bit later than usual. It was around 10 or it wasn't super late, but the streets were quiet. I went through the fence opening and walked toward the far gate. About halfway, I felt someone tap my left shoulder. It wasn't a soft tap. It felt like 2 knuckles pressing down. My instant thought was that someone had come up behind me. I whipped around, expecting to see a person, maybe a mugger, maybe a random stranger. But there was nobody there. I looked around quickly. To my left, I saw a broken down dumpster. To my right, a couple of old crates near a side door to a building. The lot itself was empty. I scanned the far corners, but nothing moved. It was unsettling because the sensation was so clear and unmistakable. I stood there, my heart pounding. My breath was stuck in my throat. Then I felt a chill run through my arms and chest. I listened for footsteps. I heard only the buzzing of that one flickering light overhead. It made this electrical hum that rose and fell. The rest of the area was silent. I stayed still for a few seconds, trying to figure out if maybe someone was hiding. My skin felt tight, and I noticed my pulse picking up speed. Then I told myself I was imagining things, that maybe a piece of debris had hit my shoulder, or a bird flew by. Something ridiculous like that. But that excuse didn't make sense. It felt exactly like a person's finger and thumb tapping. I cleared my throat, looked around one last time, and then walked on. I tried not to run, but my pace sped up. I remember my hands shaking when I got to the other side. After that night, I think about that moment every time I stepped onto the pavement there. Even in daylight, I caught myself looking over my shoulder. At first, I told my friends that it was just some weird fluke, but I noticed I tensed up as soon as I reached the fence. My shoulders would tighten, and I glance around at the corners of the lot. I'd look for any sign of movement, but there was never anyone. The paint on the walls, the flickering lights, the broken surface of the ground, it all started to feel more sinister. A few days later, I went through the lot in the afternoon. The sun was bright, and I thought I'd be fine. I had groceries in one hand, The other hand was in my jacket pocket. I was thinking about what to cook for dinner. Halfway across, I heard a faint sound. It was like static or a whisper. I'm not sure if it came from the breeze moving through a vent in one of the buildings or if it was an actual voice. I spun around fast. Nothing, just that same empty space, cracked asphalt and a few scraps of litter. I noticed the hairs on my arms standing up. My mouth went dry. I thought about turning back, but the exit was right there in front of me. So I pushed forward. My heart thumped all the way until I got out onto the sidewalk. Over the next week, the whispers got harder to ignore. They weren't loud, but it was like someone was talking on the edge of my hearing range. Sometimes it sounded like one voice, other times it felt like multiple voices overlapping. I could never make out words. It was more like a low hiss, almost like a radio that's not fully tuned into a station. Each time I'd stop and look around, the lights would flicker, and I'd see my own shadow jerk across the concrete. Then I'd hear my breathing grow heavier. My chest would tighten. I'd feel sweat start to form on my forehead. I'd force myself to move, but my legs felt sluggish. One night I decided to take my time examining the lot. This was around 6 in the evening, so there was still some light out. I thought maybe I'd find a speaker or some hidden device. Maybe there was a vagrant hanging out near the dumpster playing a trick on me. I looked behind the crates, peeked through the chain link fence on the opposite side, and even checked inside the dumpster. Nothing, just old garbage and a stale smell that made me gag. I looked up at the overhead lights. They were these large rectangular fixtures with half the glass missing. The bulbs flickered inside. The wiring was probably shot. I thought about whether faulty electricity could create some strange sound. It didn't feel likely, but I was desperate for a normal explanation. I didn't find anything suspicious. No footprints, no signs of squatters. I left that evening feeling uneasy. The next morning I had to go to the main street early. It was around 7 a.m. and the sun wasn't fully up yet. The sky was gray and there was a slight drizzle. I rushed out with an umbrella. My breath formed tiny clouds in front of me. When I slipped through the fence, I felt that instant tension again. My stomach tightened and I noticed I was gripping the umbrella handle too hard. The drizzle made a light tapping sound against the umbrella's fabric. I walked slowly, scanning the lot. A bird fluttered behind a metal pipe near the wall, startling me. My heart skipped and I cursed under my breath. I kept going. Then I heard a scraping sound on the pavement a few steps behind me. It was like someone's shoe dragging briefly. I froze, turned around. Nothing but dark concrete. The drizzle padded around me. I waited, holding my breath. Then another flicker from the overhead light. No other sounds. I hurried the rest of the way out. That was when I started telling myself it wasn't worth it. But I'm stubborn. Or maybe just in denial. I kept using the shortcut, half telling myself I was imagining things, half wanting to prove I wasn't a coward. Each time the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Sometimes I'd swear the air behind me moved. I'd catch a slight shift in temperature on my left side, like a cold patch of air. My neck would prickle and my shoulders would tense up. I'd whip around, half expecting someone to be there, but it was always just me and the cracked asphalt. At home, I tried to shake it off. I'd busy myself with everyday tasks. I'd turn on the TV, scroll through my phone, or cook a meal. But eventually I'd need to go out again, or come back from somewhere, and I'd have to decide, take the shortcut or walk around the block. Every time I ended up choosing the shortcut. It's so much faster. But also something in me felt drawn to that place. I wanted to understand what was happening. I started paying attention to physical details every time I crossed. I noted the smell of the asphalt. I felt the slight breeze in the lot. I observed how the shadows from the flickering lights danced across the ground. I checked the far corners where old pieces of metal lay. Once I saw a stray cat jump off a rusted pipe. It darted away when it saw me. It made my heart race, but at least it was something alive and real. Still, the strange noises and that persistent feeling on my left shoulder continued. I'd feel that same firm pressure for a split second, like a hand pressing down with purpose. One evening, around 9, I decided to walk across with my phone camera on, just in case I could catch something. I turned the flash on and filmed as I walked. My footsteps sounded hollow on the cracked surface, and my breathing was heavier than usual. The light on my phone shook with my unsteady grip. I paused a couple of times to point the camera behind me. The screen showed an empty space. Then I resumed walking. I made it to the exit without feeling any taps or hearing any whispers. When I checked the video later, it was just shaky footage of an empty lot. No weird shapes, no lights flickering in an unusual way. I felt frustrated. Part of me was relieved I didn't see anything. Another part of me wanted proof. A few days later, I was talking to a neighbor who also sometimes cut through the lot. He said he never experienced anything like what I described. He did mention that the lights gave him a headache and the place smelled bad, but he had no stories of touching or voices. I listened carefully, hoping to find a small detail that matched my experience. He only shrugged. He said I looked tired and that maybe I was stressed. I didn't bother pushing the topic. I could tell he thought I was letting my imagination run wild, but I know it's not just in my head. I'm not the jumpy type. This is different. It feels external, like something's actually reaching out to me. I don't think it's a person though. I've never caught more than a glimpse of shadows or an odd movement in the corner of my eye. Once I thought I saw a figure standing by the dumpster, but when I focused it was just a pile of cardboard boxes. The sensation persists. My skin crawls every time I set foot on that pavement. I've started dreading nighttime trips through the lot. If I have to come home late, I delay leaving wherever I am. I tell my friends I'm not in a rush, or that I'll grab a ride. Sometimes I can't avoid it because cabs are expensive and I hate walking the long way around. So I slip through the fence, hands sweaty, heart pounding. I keep my head low and try to stay calm. Then the whispers creep up. It's like a soft crackle in my ears. My scalp tingles, and I clench my jaw. I look back again and again, convinced there's someone behind me. There never is, at least not someone I can see. Last week I made a conscious decision to avoid the lot for a while. I walked around the block instead, and it felt good to not have to deal with that tension. But it's a long detour, and after a few days the convenience of the shortcut started tugging at me again. It's like a habit. I keep thinking maybe it was all in my head. Maybe that weird phase passed. So, a couple of nights ago I tried again. I just came from the store with 2 bags of groceries. I wanted to get home fast and put the perishables in the fridge. It was only around. I figured I'd be fine. I slipped through the fence. The lot was dim but not fully dark. The overhead lights flickered with that familiar electrical hum. I walked, trying to focus on the crunch of gravel and the slight squeak of my sneakers against the asphalt. About a third of the way in, I felt the weight on my shoulder again. Just for a second, I froze. The grocery bag swung and knocked my leg. My pulse sped up. I spun around, nearly tripping over my own feet. I held the grocery bags up like some kind of shield. Nothing was there. No wind, no movement. The hair on my arm stood on end. My hands shook, and I felt my throat constrict. I forced myself to take a deep breath and keep moving. About 3 steps later, I heard a faint whisper, like a sigh, right behind my ear. My skin crawled, and I actually let out a small yelp. My voice echoed back at me. When I finally got out of there, I was sweating and breathing hard. My face felt flushed. I realized I might not be able to keep cutting through anymore. It's taking a toll on me. Every time I walk that path, I feel my nerves fraying. It's not just the touch on my shoulder. It's the constant sense that something is hovering behind me, watching me. I can't see anything, but the feeling never goes away. I'm writing this down now because it's weighing on me. I'm not going to involve the police or anything. There's no real crime happening as far as I can tell. No one is jumping out with a knife or mugging me. It's just this unexplainable pressure and these strange whispers. I'm trying not to let it get in my head too much. But I can't deny that part of me is on edge every time I consider that route. I'm planning to avoid the shortcut from now on. Even though it's a hassle, I'd rather walk around the block than deal with that creeping dread. I'm tired of whirling around expecting to see someone. I'm tired of my skin crawling and my stomach churning. I'm tired of feeling like I'm about to see something that shouldn't be there. There's enough stress in day-to-day life without adding a haunted feeling parking lot to it. Maybe one day the owner will tear it down, or fix it up, or maybe the city will do something about it. Until then, I'm done stepping foot in there. I'm done letting that lot mess with my head. It's not worth the convenience anymore. It's not worth the sweat on my palms, the racing heartbeat, or the knots in my gut. I'd rather take a few extra minutes on the sidewalk than keep looking over my shoulder for something I can't see. And that's all I can say about it. I don't have any tidy explanation. I just know I felt a hand on me when there was no one there, and I heard whispers that I couldn't trace. That's enough for me to call it quits. I'm taking another route from now on, and I hope I can finally let that creepy parking lot go. I'm not someone who usually talks about odd things, but this keeps happening, and I can't ignore it. It's like a dark blur stuck to my shoulder. Every time I look directly at it, there's nothing there, but the shape sticks to the glass like a smudge. I want to believe it's a trick of light, but it makes my neck tense, and I can't stop looking over my shoulder. This story has become part of my nights, and I feel like I need to get it off my chest. Maybe talking about it will help. My job demands long hours. I usually leave the office when most of my coworkers have already gone home. I've gotten used to the quiet corridors in the hum of the fluorescent lights. Around midnight, my stomach starts to rumble. I don't like fast food drive-thrus, so I usually head over to this small 24-hour market. It's one of those places that has a bright sign on top, a few parking spaces out front, and large glass panels as the storefront. There's a single entrance door that's mostly glass too. The inside is well lit, but it always feels a little empty. When I pull up, I see rows of neon stripes inside, and a tall security camera mounted near the top of the door. The first night I noticed something was a few weeks ago. It was around 1 a.m. I was feeling wiped out from work. My shoulders were stiff, and I kept rolling them to ease the tension. I parked my car near the front because the lot was empty. I shut off the engine, stepped out, and noticed my own reflection in the glass. The store's bright lights made my reflection stand out against the dark sky. I glanced at myself and was a little surprised by how tired I looked. Then, right next to my left shoulder, I saw this faint shadow. It was like a patch of darkness against the glass, shaped vaguely like a hunched figure. I thought maybe it was my coat or something behind me. I turned around to look, but there was nobody there, and nothing but asphalt under a small light post. When I looked back at the glass, the shadow was still there, kind of behind my reflection. It felt like it was leaning closer, almost brushing against me. My heart started pounding in my chest. My scalp prickled. I blinked a few times and stepped back. As soon as I stepped away from the glass, the shadow vanished. It didn't slide away or fade slowly. It was just gone. I stood there for a few seconds trying to slow my breathing. I walked into the store, grabbed a sandwich, paid, and left, not looking at the glass again. The next morning, I tried to explain it to myself. Maybe I was exhausted, or the lighting was weird, or there was a glitch in the reflection. That made sense to me. I've seen random reflections on car windows before, and sometimes they look like people. I convinced myself there was nothing to worry about. But the following night, I got held up at the office again, so I drove back to the same market around the same time. I pulled into the parking lot. I felt a bit nervous, but I kept telling myself I was overreacting. The lot was empty again. Bright lights from inside spilled across the glass, and I could see my reflection pretty clearly. I hesitated before stepping out of the car. My heart did a small flip in my chest when I realized I was scared to look at myself in that glass. But I needed something to eat. I couldn't just drive away, so I forced myself out of the car. I walked toward the entrance, scanning the glass the entire time. Everything looked normal at first. Just my reflection, the signage behind it, shelves of snacks, and that single bored cashier who always sits near the register. Then I saw it. The shadow was behind me, lower than my height, kind of blurred but definitely moving in sync with my reflection. My breath caught in my throat. I froze with my hand halfway to my jacket pocket. My legs felt heavy. My eyes stung because I was staring so hard trying to make out some detail. I wanted to see if it had a face or limbs, but it was just a mass of darkness. I looked over my shoulder again, slowly this time, with a chill spreading across my chest. There was nobody in the lot. When I turned back, the shape still hovered near my reflection. I swallowed, took one step back, and the shape flickered out of view. I stumbled a bit, almost tripped over my own foot, then steadied myself. The moment was so fast, like a quick jump from one frame to another. My heart was racing, and my hands were clammy. I didn't want to stay there, but I felt strangely compelled to prove I wasn't seeing things. So I inched closer again, leaning in toward the glass. For a split second, the shadow appeared again right next to my reflection's shoulder, then it vanished when I stepped too close. I jerked back and felt adrenaline spiking through my arms. I grabbed the door, pulled it open, and rushed inside. The cashier gave me a weird look, probably because my face was pale and I was panting like I'd run a block. I tried to ignore him. I just grabbed a bag of chips and a soda. paid, and left without making eye contact. My reflection on the way out looked normal, so I hurried to my car and drove away. My heart didn't stop hammering until I was a few miles down the road. Over the next few days, I tried to avoid going there. I found excuses to bring food from home or stop somewhere else. But that market is on my route, and it's open all night, so it's hard to resist. Eventually, I went back. There's a practical side of me that doesn't want to give in to paranoia. Late one night, I pulled into the parking lot, half hoping I wouldn't see anything. I left my car lights on for a moment, shining directly on the glass, but that felt pointless, so I turned them off and stepped out. This time, I didn't see anything at first. I walked to the door, kept my eyes down, and tried not to look at the glass. My chest was tight. I clenched my teeth. The curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced up. The shadow was there again behind me, almost pressed up against my outline in the reflection. My stomach flipped. My ears started buzzing like a sudden rush of blood. I jerked my head around, scanning the dark parking lot. The corner security light showed the pavement empty except for my car. No sign of anyone else. I stared at the edges of the lot, waiting for movement. Sweat gathered at the back of my neck. Then I faced the glass again, and of course the shape was waiting in the reflection. It looked still, but I felt it was watching me. My knees felt weak, so I tore my gaze away and pushed inside. Once I was in the store, it felt safer. The bright lights, music from the ceiling speakers, and hum of the refrigerators in the back all made me feel less anxious. I wanted to stand there for a while but didn't want the cashier to question me, so I picked up a sandwich, paid, and left in a hurry. As soon as I was back in my car, I locked the doors. My fingers shook as I fumbled with the keys. For a while, I tried changing my routine just so I wouldn't end up at that market again. But life got in the way, and I found myself there again one late night. Now, each time I arrive, I have this instant knot in my stomach. My hair stands on end. I feel like something is behind me before I even reach the door. I noticed I started sweating more and my breathing gets shallow. Sometimes I hear a faint ringing in my ears when I see that shape. It's like my body is on high alert, bracing for a threat that never fully materializes. I keep telling myself it's not real, but my body reacts as if it's real. One evening, I tried an experiment. I drove there around 11 p.m., which is earlier than usual, hoping that the change in time might change the reflection. I stepped out of my car, walked to the glass, and stared at my reflection from a few feet away. For the first few seconds, I saw only me. Then, I saw a slight dark smudge grow behind me. It was faint, but my heart jumped. I stepped forward and the shape strengthened. I stepped back, and it vanished. I repeated this almost like I was trying to test the boundaries of this weird phenomenon. Each time the shadow came back as soon as I was close to the glass. Each time it disappeared when I was farther away. I felt a rush of cold sweat across my forehead. I realized my hands were clenched and my nails were digging into my palms. The cashier probably thought I was crazy. He must have seen me standing outside, moving forward and backward. At one point, he even opened the door and asked if I needed help. I shook my head and said, "I'm just thinking about something." My voice sounded shaky. I grabbed a soda and left without lingering. I didn't want to discuss the reflection with him because I knew it would sound absurd. After that night, I tried to talk myself into believing it could be a lighting quirk or some reflection from inside the store. But the shape always has the same position. It's never in front of me or on my right side. It's always on my left, and looks like it's leaning into me. I feel this chill in my left shoulder whenever I think about it. Some nights I sit in my car in front of the store and wait, trying to see if the shape will appear in the window when I'm still inside the car. It never does. It only shows up when I stand outside, looking directly at my reflection. Last week, I made the mistake of walking up to the store in a hurry, hoping to just rush in without looking. My eyes flicked to the glass by instinct and I caught a glimpse of the shape behind me, even closer than before. My heart pounded so hard that I thought I might pass out. I felt a surge of adrenaline course through my arms and legs, and I froze in place. My mind went blank except for a single thought. I need to move. So I just bolted inside, ignoring everything else. Inside, I leaned on a shelf, breathing fast, feeling sweat drip down my temples. My legs were shaking. The cashier started to say something, but I walked straight to the back of the store, grabbed a water, and tried to calm down. After a minute, I paid and left, not looking at the door as I walked out. As I pulled away in my car, my arms felt limp. I was trembling the whole drive home. Now I've reached a point where I avoid looking at the glass when I arrive. I keep my eyes on the ground or my phone. I do whatever I can to ignore the reflection, but sometimes out of the corner of my eye, I see a dark shape. My mouth goes dry, and I feel tingles crawl up my spine. I still check behind me, but there's never anyone there. I've started parking off to the side so I'm not facing the glass directly. It helps a bit, but not much. I haven't told anybody at work about this. I'm worried they'll think I'm losing it. One coworker joked that I need a vacation, and maybe he's right. But every time I think about taking a break, I remember that I'd have to change my entire schedule and routine just to avoid a place where I get my snacks. It feels ridiculous. Yet, I can't deny this is happening. Every time I see that shape, my heart races and I get that prickly sensation on my arms. It feels too real to dismiss. I also don't see this shape anywhere else. It's always that glass. Always at night. A few days ago, I tried to stay calm. I parked off to the side, walked in without looking at my reflection, and focused on breathing. My chest felt tight, but I managed to buy my usual sandwich. While I was paying, the cashier asked why I look so tense when I come in. I didn't know how to answer. I just shrugged and said I've been stressed at work. I left quickly. The shape was in my peripheral vision, but I didn't turn to check. I got to my car, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment, letting my pulse settle. The worst part is how it's affecting my sleep. I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, sweating, thinking I see that dark blur in a corner of my bedroom. I rub my eyes and realize there's nothing there, but my heart keeps hammering for a while. My arms feel weak, and I can't get comfortable again. Sometimes I wonder if I should just stop going to that store altogether, but something about it seems to pull me back. Maybe because it's convenient, or maybe because I want an explanation. Right now, I'm trying to avoid looking at glass surfaces in general. I catch myself glancing at windows in my office building or the reflection in my car's side mirror, and I feel a spike of anxiety. I imagine that shape could show up in any reflective surface, but it hasn't so far. It's only there at the market. That fact calms me a bit, but it also makes the situation more unsettling, because it's tied to that one location. I'm telling you all this because it's the only way I can deal with it. I don't know what that shape is, and I'm not even sure I want to know. It hasn't harmed me, but it makes my chest feel tight, and it fills me with dread. My neck cramps when I think about it too much. My palms start sweating when I replay the memory of it standing right behind my reflection. I can explain it to anyone without sounding nuts, but I know what I've seen, and I can't forget it. I still go to the market sometimes. I still see that shape out of the corner of my eye. I don't look at it for long anymore. I avoid direct eye contact. I don't hang around. I get what I need and leave. If it's there, it's there. If it's gone, then maybe I get a few minutes of peace. That's all I can do right now. I'm not planning to confront it, and I'm not planning to make a scene about it. I'll keep my head down, buy my sandwich, and hope that one day it just stops appearing. Until then, I'm doing my best to act normal and ignore the dark silhouette in the glass. I started running at night a few weeks ago because I couldn't take the daytime heat anymore. The streets felt cooler after dark, and it was easier to push through each mile without the sun weighing me down. Everything seemed normal at first, but things changed once I started passing through that quiet street near the end of my route. Now, every time I go there, I hear footsteps behind me, but I can't see who or what is making them. My name is Joel. I'm 32, and I've been living in this neighborhood for about 5 years. I work a regular office job, so I try to stay active by running in the evenings or late at night. This new habit of running after 9 or 10 at night began because the heat wave became unbearable. At first I liked the peacefulness. The sidewalks are empty, and I can clear my head. Most nights I listen to my breathing or the sound of my shoes on the pavement. It's become a routine that calms me down after long days. That routine changed when I started noticing these footsteps. The street I'm talking about is 2 blocks away from my apartment. It's a residential area, but it's quiet and darker than most streets around here. The streetlights are spaced farther apart, so I only see patches of light and shadow as I run. The first time I heard the footsteps, I thought it was a trick of the wind or maybe an echo. I heard a soft pat-pat behind me, almost in sync with my pace. When I slowed down to figure out if it was real, everything went silent. I didn't get scared right away. I assumed it was just my imagination. I continued running, picked up speed again, and then I heard it. The footsteps returned, still a half beat behind mine. At that moment, my body tensed. I felt my back muscles contract, and I noticed a slight chill on my arms despite the warm night. My mouth went dry, and I glanced over my shoulder, but I saw nothing. There wasn't a single person in sight. I told myself it was probably nothing, so I finished my run and went home. I tried not to dwell on it. The next day, I got ready for another run. I laced up my shoes and double-checked my phone battery just in case I wanted to use the flashlight. I thought about changing my route, but I figured I'd just been spooking myself the night before. I wasn't going to let one weird moment ruin my workout routine. I set out around the same time, a little after 10. The first stretch was calm and uneventful. Cars passed by occasionally, and I saw a couple walking a dog. Everything felt normal. Then I reached that quiet street again. As soon as I turned onto it, I noticed how still it felt. There was only the distant hum of an air conditioner and my own breathing. Halfway down the block, I heard the footsteps again. My legs tensed, and my pulse kicked up. The hairs on my neck stood up. It was the exact same pattern. Whenever my right foot landed, I'd hear a faint step behind me a moment later. It almost sounded like the person or thing behind me was wearing the same type of running shoes. That was how close the rhythm felt. I tried something different this time. I stopped immediately. No gradual slowdown, just a full stop. The second I stopped, the other steps stopped too. I felt my heart pounding in my chest. I turned around and looked down the sidewalk. I looked between the parked cars. I stared into the shadows under a nearby tree. There was nothing there. My breath was a little ragged, and my mind raced with possibilities. Maybe there's some echo in this particular street layout. Maybe there's an animal following me. Maybe someone is messing with me. I started moving again, just a slow jog, and the footsteps came back. I sped up, and they sped up. I felt sweat prickling under my armpits and my hands felt a little clammy. I ran faster, thinking I'd catch sight of whoever it was if they had to keep up at a sprint. But no matter how fast I ran, the footsteps stayed the same distance behind me, always just out of sight. When I reached the end of the street and turned a corner, the footsteps vanished as if they'd never existed. The rest of my route was normal again. That night I had trouble sleeping. I kept replaying the sound of those steps in my head. The next day at work, I was distracted. I considered skipping my run, but I didn't want to give in to fear. Instead, I decided to change up my approach. I would run the street backwards, going the opposite direction. Or I'd loop around the block to try and sneak up on whoever was there. The following night, around the same time, I made my approach from the opposite side. I ran a few blocks out of my usual path and entered the quiet street from the far end. This time, I was ready. I had my phone in my hand and I kept the flashlight off for the moment, but I was prepared to switch it on quickly. The street was deserted as usual. A few porch lights glowed in the distance, but I didn't see any movement. My own footsteps sounded clear on the asphalt. I got about halfway through the street before it started again. That soft rhythm popped up behind me. My heart thumped. I tried to keep my breathing steady. My arms swung faster, and I felt my thighs burn as I picked up the pace. The footsteps stayed with me, always half a second behind. Suddenly, I turned around with the flashlight on, shining it directly behind me. Nothing. The sound stopped instantly, but there was nobody in my flashlight beam. No dark shape hiding behind a mailbox. No figure ducking behind a car. My chest tightened with frustration. I turned the flashlight off and ran back the way I came. I looped the block, staying alert for any motion or shadow that might give a person away. I circled a few times, doubling back in case someone was trying to hide. I checked behind trash cans, peered into driveways, and tried to surprise whoever was behind this. I found nobody. The street was completely empty except for me. Eventually I gave up and went home, feeling uneasy. I took a long shower, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. During the next few days, I tried asking a couple of neighbors if they'd ever heard weird echoes or noticed any unusual sounds. Most of them just shook their heads or said they rarely walked around at that time of night. One neighbor suggested it might be an echo bouncing off the buildings, especially with the way the street is laid out. Another neighbor shrugged and told me to be careful running around after dark, because not everyone in the neighborhood is friendly. Nobody offered a solid explanation. I kept running though. I felt stubborn about it. I didn't want to let fear control me. Each night I'd prepare for the possibility that I'd hear those footsteps again. And each night it happened the same way. I'd get to that quiet street. I'd hear them. If I slowed down, they'd If I sped up, they'd keep up. It never happened on any other street, just that one. It started to feel personal, like a twisted game that I couldn't win. One night I decided I'd confront my fear head on. I approached the street at my usual pace, but as soon as I heard the footsteps I stopped and stood still. I forced myself to stay there for a good 30 seconds just waiting. My ears strained to pick up any noise. My breathing sounded loud in my own head, and I heard my heartbeat in my ears. Still, there was nothing but silence. Then I took a few slow steps forward. Sure enough, the footsteps resumed behind me, faint but steady. I spun around and sprinted toward the source of the noise. I aimed my phone's flashlight straight ahead as I ran. My chest burned with the sudden burst of effort. My arms pumped and my mind raced with every possibility. A prankster, a stray dog, some mechanical echo, or something else. But I saw nobody. I heard only my own shoes pounding on the pavement. I felt sweat dripping down my face. The tension in my shoulders made my neck stiff. I pulled up to a stop and shone the light in all directions. There was no one. I even checked under a parked truck, looking for feet, but saw nothing. My stomach tightened and I realized my hands were trembling slightly. Part of me wanted to shout or curse at whatever it was, but I felt stupid yelling at empty air, so I turned around and jogged back, feeling more unsettled than ever. That weird pattern continued for several nights. I tried wearing different shoes, thinking maybe they made a sound that echoed in a weird way. It didn't help. I considered bringing a friend along, but my friends usually aren't up that late, and I wasn't sure they'd believe me anyway. A few times, I even took off my headphones when I wore them, just to make sure I wasn't mixing up a sound in my music. But I wasn't imagining it. The footsteps were there, always behind me, always on that street, always vanishing the second I stopped or turned around. Over time, it started messing with my sleep. I'd lie in bed listening to every little noise in my apartment, waiting for footsteps that never came. I'd picture the street in my head lit by those sparse streetlights. I'd see the exact areas where I'd felt the presence behind me. I'd think about the corners where I'd tried to hide to catch whoever was there. My mind kept running through scenarios. Could it be some kind of hidden speaker? Someone playing a recording? But that didn't make sense, because the footsteps matched my pace so perfectly. One night, I went out earlier than usual around 9 just to see if anything changed. The street was a little brighter at that time because a few houses still had lights on. I thought I might see more people walking around, but it was still pretty dead. I ran up and down the block twice, and I heard nothing. I felt almost relieved, like maybe the problem only happened late at night. Then I did a third pass, closer to 10, and I heard the footsteps again. Same pattern, same distance, same creeping feeling of being followed. My skin crawled, and a burst of adrenaline shot through me. I didn't even try to investigate that time. I just ran all the way to the end of the street and didn't look back until I was off that block. At that point, I started questioning whether I should keep using that street. Maybe I should just skip it, but I felt like I needed to know what was going on. I'm the type of person who hates not having answers. The next night, I brought a small video camera, thinking I'd record myself running and see if I could pick up any sound or image behind me. I attached it to a belt that faced backward. It was a cheap setup, and I wasn't sure it would work well in the dark, but I had to try something. I ran my usual path until I hit the quiet street. I let the camera run. As expected, I heard footsteps trailing behind me. My stomach was in knots, but I forced myself to keep going until the end of the block. I hurried home, eager to check the footage. I plugged the camera into my laptop and watched. I heard my own breathing, the sound of my steps on the pavement, and very faintly, that extra pair of footsteps. The video showed an empty sidewalk behind me, bobbing in time with my steps. I didn't see anyone. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared. Just the faint footsteps on the audio track and an empty street in the video. That confirmed I wasn't imagining things, but it didn't tell me what was causing them. No matter how many times I watched the video, I saw no sign of a person following me. It was just me, a quiet street, and that strange noise. I started to get a sense of dread when I thought about running again. My appetite changed, and I felt jumpy during the day. I'd hear the sound of someone walking in the hallway at work, and I'd tense up. My heart would beat faster, expecting those same half-step behind footsteps. Despite my anxiety, I kept going back there, always late at night, always around the same time. Each visit was the same. I'd run, I'd hear the footsteps, and I'd fail to find anyone. I started feeling an odd pressure in my chest whenever I approached that street. My body seemed to know something wasn't right. My face would feel hot, and I'd grip my phone tightly, ready to flip the flashlight on at a second's notice. After several nights of this, I reached a breaking point. I stopped in the middle of the street when I heard the footsteps and yelled out, "I know you're there. Show yourself." My voice echoed against the silent houses. My throat felt tight, and my voice wavered with a mix of fear and frustration. Nobody answered, no figure emerged, and the footsteps went silent. I stood there, my breath coming out in hard gulps. My eyes darted from side to side, trying to catch any sign of movement. Nothing happened. I walked the rest of the way off that street without running. My legs felt weak, and my arms felt heavy. The night air pressed against my skin, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. That was the first time I genuinely felt terrified, and I realized I didn't want to go back there anymore. The stress wasn't worth it. I wasn't sleeping well, I was on edge every day, and I couldn't find a reasonable explanation. I still run at night, but I've changed my route. I avoid that street. It's not worth the anxiety. Sometimes I think about going back just to see if the footsteps will start up again, but then I remember the feeling of having my heart pound like it was trying to burst out of my chest. I remember how my mouth would go dry and how I'd spin around expecting to see someone right behind me, only to find an empty sidewalk. That sense of dread is burned into my memory. For now, I'd rather not push my luck. I don't have a neat conclusion or a satisfying explanation. All I know is that something followed me on that street, and I never caught a glimpse of who or what it was. As far as I can tell, it's still there, waiting for the next person who decides to run by after dark. I'm just not going to be that person anymore. I smelled that strange odor on my second night in the house. It hit me hard, like someone had spilled a mixture of cheap perfume and bleach in a corner I couldn't see. It was so strong that I stopped in the middle of the hallway. I didn't know what I was dealing with, but I knew I didn't like it. I had 2 rooms downstairs, and the smell came from the one I barely used. That night, I just stood there, staring at the closed door. My gut tightened, and my heart pounded. I wasn't sure why I felt so uneasy, but something about that smell made me want to keep my distance. I rented this place because I liked the location and the overall layout. It's a small 2-story home with a modest backyard and a quiet street out front. The landlord offered me a good deal, so I jumped on it. The house has 2 rooms on the ground floor. One is my workspace, where I keep my desk and computer. The other is a guest room, mostly empty except for a bed and a small dresser. I barely go in there. Sometimes friends crash for a night, but not often. Ever since I moved in, that guest room felt a bit cold, but I chalked it up to lack of sunlight. It faces north, and it barely gets direct light. That never bothered me much until the odor started. A few days after I noticed the smell, I went inside the guest room to investigate. I looked at the walls, sniffed around each corner, and checked under the bed. I didn't see any stains or leaks. The walls felt dry, and the air didn't feel damp, so I ruled out mold. I checked the small closet. Nothing. I opened the dresser drawers. They were empty. I had placed a spare blanket in the bottom drawer for visitors, but it was still folded and clean. There was no trash or food anywhere. There was no sign of animals or insects. I was thorough. I spent about half an hour in there searching. Then I opened the window, let the breeze in, and left. The odor seemed to disappear when I aired the place out. That same evening, though, I caught a hint of it again when I passed the closed door. It was faint, but it made my stomach clench. It was sickly sweet and sour at the same time. I felt an odd pressure in my sinuses, like the smell clung to my nose hairs. I decided not to worry too much. Maybe there was a chemical in the paint or some leftover cleaning product from a previous tenant. I figured it would go away if I kept the window open regularly. A week went by. The odor would come and go, always stronger at night. During the day, the guest room smelled almost normal if I left a window ajar. But around sunset, it returned. My evenings got tense. I started holding my breath whenever I walked past that door. I kept telling myself it was just a weird house quirk. Every place has something off about it, but I felt a low-level anxiety growing in my chest. I tried to ignore it. I thought if I pretended it wasn't a big deal, it might stop bugging me. That wasn't the case. One night, I was lying in bed upstairs trying to sleep. I heard a soft sound that reminded me of plastic bags shifting or rustling. At first I thought it was the wind in the backyard. Then I realized it was too soft and too deliberate. It sounded like something was being moved carefully. The noise came from downstairs, so I got up. My legs felt tense. I walked down in the dark, flipping on each light as I went. The plastic rustling noise stopped before I reached the bottom step. The guest room door was closed, just like I always leave it. I stared at the doorknob. It was locked from the outside. I keep it locked because there's no reason to leave it open, and I don't like random drafts. My landlord gave me a single key for both downstairs rooms, and I had that key in my pocket, so nobody could be inside. But the air in the hallway smelled thick and sour sweet, almost like the odor was waiting for me. My nostrils flared, my head felt stuffy. I unlocked a door, stepped in, and flicked the light on. The guest room was empty. The bed was made. The dresser was shut. The closet door was closed. I checked everything again, just like I had done before. I looked under the bed. I opened the dresser drawers. Nothing was out of place. The window was latched from the inside, just as I'd left it. The smell, though, was intense, and it made the back of my throat itch. I opened the window and stood there breathing the cooler outside air. After a few minutes, the odor weakened. I locked up the room again, went back upstairs, and forced myself to sleep. Over the next couple of weeks, I tried different strategies to eliminate the odor. I scrubbed the walls with mild detergent. I cleaned the floors. I left a small bowl of vinegar in the room, hoping it would absorb the smell. I even tried an air freshener, but that just made it worse. The sweet perfume clashed with the manufactured fragrance, resulting in an even stranger mix. By day, I could almost ignore it if I kept the window open. By night, it crept back in thick and nauseating. I heard that plastic rustling sound again a few times, always late at night, always stopping the moment I got close. I became jumpy. I found myself walking around the house with my shoulders tight. I started expecting that smell every time I went downstairs. I felt it lingering near me, even if I was in my workspace or in the kitchen. Some nights I thought I caught a whiff of it on my clothes, but I never found a source. I told a friend about it, and he joked that maybe an animal died in the walls. I considered that possibility, but the smell wasn't rotten or decaying. It was more like a chemical that had gone bad. There was a sweet edge to it. It was not the smell of death, and I never heard scratching or scuttling. The rustling I heard sounded more like thin plastic, not an animal. I decided to pay attention to the times I heard that noise. It always happened between 1 and 3 in the morning. The first time I noticed that pattern, I felt a chill in my gut. Why would it be at the same time every night? I checked the heating and cooling vents. I made sure the air conditioning wasn't turning on at weird times. I tested the circuit breaker. Everything seemed normal. I tried staying awake all night, with the lights off, sitting quietly in my living room. I wanted to catch the noise, but on the nights I waited for it, it never came. On nights I fell asleep, I would wake up to it. Then I'd rush downstairs, and it would stop. It started to feel personal, like it waited for me to be half asleep. One night around 2 in the morning, I woke up drenched in sweat. My heart was beating fast, and I smelled that odor even in my bedroom. My mouth tasted sour. I got up, stumbled to the hallway, and the smell felt stronger than ever, almost pushing me down the stairs. I turned on every light and went straight to the guest room door.
I felt a little dizzy.
My fingers fumbled with the key.
I opened the door, flipped on the light, and stepped inside. The odor seemed to hug the room. I stood there blinking, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the harsh light. Then I saw something that stopped me cold. A crumpled plastic bag in the corner near the dresser. It was white with a small red logo, the kind you get from convenience stores. I had never seen it before in this house. I leaned over and picked it up. It was empty. No debris inside. No receipts. No leftover food. Just a plain plastic bag. My chest felt tight. I threw the bag away and checked the window. It was locked from the inside as usual. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning I tried to dismiss the bag situation. Maybe I left a bag in there when I first moved in and forgot about it. But I knew that wasn't true. I had cleaned the room thoroughly more than once. There was no reason a random plastic bag would appear out of nowhere. I felt uneasy, but I went to work, telling myself that living alone sometimes makes you imagine things. Yet I couldn't shake the heaviness in my chest. That smell was getting into my head. Every day for the next week, I checked the guest room after work. Everything looked normal, except for that lingering odor in the evening. I started noticing something else too. Sometimes the smell felt like it followed me. I'd be in the kitchen and catch a faint whiff. I'd be in my workspace and sense it near my chair. It made my skin prickle. I'd look around, find nothing and move on. But the sense of being followed stuck with me. It caused me to lose focus on my job. I started getting anxious when I thought about coming home. I considered calling the landlord, then imagined the conversation. There's a strange odor in the guest room that smells sweet and sour, I'd say. And I keep hearing plastic bags at night. A bag had also appeared in the corner. He'd probably think I was crazy or overreacting. Besides, the rent was cheap. I didn't want to cause problems or invite him to inspect every inch of my home. I liked my privacy, so I decided to handle it on my own. One evening, I stood in front of the guest room door with my phone camera on, filming as I unlocked it. I wanted to document what was inside. I pushed the door open. My phone light lit up the room. The smell was there, sharper than ever. I checked every corner while recording. The bed was tidy. The dresser was shut. The closet door was closed. The trash can was empty. The plastic bag I found before was gone. I tossed it in the outside bin days ago, so I was sure it wouldn't reappear inside. I stopped recording. Nothing unusual showed up on my camera. Just an empty room. I swallowed hard and left. That night, around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of that plastic rustling again. This time, it was louder and faster, like someone was rifling through a big stack of bags. I jumped out of bed, my heart hammering, and ran downstairs. The hallway smelled like that sweet and sour mix. My hand shook as I unlocked the guest room door. When I opened it, I nearly gagged. The smell felt dense, like it clung to every inch of the air. I flicked on the light and the room was empty. The bag noise had stopped, and there was no sign of anything new. I opened a closet. Empty. I opened the dresser drawers. Empty. I moved the bed aside, and the floor was bare. I stood there breathing through my mouth. My pulse throbbed in my neck. My mind raced. I couldn't explain any of it. I decided I wouldn't open that door anymore at night. I told myself I would wait until morning if I ever heard that noise again. I started putting a towel at the bottom of the door to block the smell. It worked a little, but I still sensed it when I walked through the hallway. It made my eyes water. I bought a small fan and left it running in the guest room during the day. By the time I got home from work, the odor seemed weaker, but at night it came back full force. My nose would sting, and my throat would feel scratchy. Sometimes I'd cough. The tension in my body grew. I felt exhausted all the time. One evening I tried to relax in my living room, watching a movie, when I heard a faint clink sound. It came from the direction of the guest room. I paused the movie and listened. Another clink, then a soft scraping. It sounded like metal against metal. I stood up and walked slowly to the hallway. The smell was there, heavier than usual. I felt my stomach churn. I pressed my ear against the guest room door. The scraping continued, like a small piece of metal was dragging across a hard surface. I gripped the doorknob but didn't unlock it. My hands felt clammy. My breathing was shallow. I thought about opening the door. Then I remembered how every time I opened it, nothing was there. The moment I turned the key, the sound would vanish and I'd be left with that horrible smell and an empty room. I backed away, went into my workspace, and closed the door behind me. I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I sat at my desk, tried to distract myself with work, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept going back to the locked guest room. The weird noises, the unexplainable smell, the plastic bag that showed up once. I wanted to leave the house. A wave of anxiety hit me. My chest tightened and I had trouble breathing normally. I forced myself to take slow, deep breaths, but it was hard. I spent that night in my workspace, awake and on edge. Every time I thought I heard a noise, I tensed up, but I didn't go near the guest room door again. In the morning, I opened it as part of my routine. The odor was faint. The window was still closed. Everything looked normal. I didn't know how to handle the situation. It was affecting my sleep, my appetite, and my peace of mind. Yet, I couldn't justify moving out. My lease wasn't up, and I didn't have extra money for a new place. I also felt stubborn. I didn't want to be driven out by an unexplained smell and some strange noises. Now I keep that door locked all the time. I only go in there to open the window in the morning and close it at night. I change the sheets occasionally, just in case the smell is clinging to the bedding. I find nothing each time, but the odor persists. Sometimes I hear that plastic rustling or the faint clink of metal. I still check, but always the same result. An empty room that reeks of something I can't identify. I've tried searching online for a chemical or perfume that matches the description, but nothing seems right. My new plan is to install a small camera in the room, one of those security cameras with night vision. I want to see if anything happens in there when I'm not looking. I feel weird about filming an empty room, but I have no other ideas. The tension in my chest doesn't go away unless I'm completely out of the house. My friends think I'm stressed from work, but I know this place is wearing me down. I'm on the verge of taking drastic action, like breaking open the walls or ripping up the floor. Something's wrong with that guest room, and I don't know how to stop it. Until then, I avoid going in there at night. I keep my ears open for rustling sounds or scraping noises. The second the sun goes down, the smell gets stronger. Sometimes I imagine it creeping into the hallway when I'm not looking. My skin feels tight and clammy when I think about it for too long. My heart rate spikes every time I pass the door after midnight. It's a strange way to live, but I haven't found a solution yet. I still sleep with one ear open, waiting to hear those plastic bags. When I do, I force myself to stay put. I tell myself it's better not to look. The odor feels alive, and I don't want to give it more attention than it already demands. That's where I stand now. I have a locked guest room with a sour, sweet smell, occasional plastic rustling, and no logical explanation. I feel trapped by it, but I haven't left yet. Maybe I'll figure it out. Maybe it will disappear on its own. I have no clue. All I know is I'm tired, and that smell won't let me rest. Every night I expect to hear it. Every night my pulse races when I walk by, and every night I keep that door closed, because something in me says that if I open it when the odor is at its peak, I might find more than just a bad smell. So I live with the tension, hoping it doesn't break me before my lease expires. I heard the whistle for the first time 3 weeks ago. It was a slow afternoon, and I was sitting at my kitchen table, checking my phone for messages. My building is usually quiet, and I like it that way. No traffic noise, no loud neighbors, no random chatter in the hallway. So when I heard that strange low whistle drift through my open window, I froze. It sounded like 2 long notes, and they reminded me of my name. The tone was raspy, kind of like someone whispering "Hey you" in a whistled form. It sent a chill down my arms. I checked outside right away, but I saw nothing on the street and heard no one talking. I shrugged it off. I figured it was probably just the wind or some weird echo. But it happened again, and again. And now I'm starting to think I'm not imagining it. I've lived in this apartment for 5 years. The area is always still, especially at night, and I got used to that. On weekdays, I barely notice any movement. Sometimes I see my neighbor from across the hallway, a middle-aged guy who nods at me, but never says much. He usually wears the same old jacket and hat, and I've never even gotten his name. I see the landlord once in a while when he picks up the mail. No one else does that. That's one of the reasons I moved here. I like peace. I like the kind of place where I can get up in the middle of the night to grab a glass of water and not worry about noise coming through the walls. That whistle changed everything. It's always just 2 or 3 notes, never more. But it cuts straight through silence. Sometimes it's high-pitched, sometimes it's more guttural. One time it sounded like a person clearing their throat right next to my ear. My heart started pounding when that happened. I felt my chest tighten and scanned the room with my eyes, but nothing was out of place. I told myself it had to be pipes or some draft somewhere. I wanted to prove it was something normal. The second time I heard it was in the hallway of my building. I had just locked my door and was walking toward the elevator. I didn't see or hear anyone else around, but I heard that low whistle again behind me. My shoulders tensed up, and I whipped around. No one was there. I looked down the hallway toward the stairwell, but it was empty. I looked back at my door. Nothing. I tried to shrug it off, but my heart was racing. It felt too personal this time. It wasn't just a random sound. It seemed closer. I stepped into the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, and tried to calm myself. I kept telling myself it was a coincidence, but in my mind it still sounded like it was calling me. It got worse at night. I usually stay up late watching random shows or browsing online. The building is dead silent after midnight, which used to help me relax. But now I can help listening for that whistle. Around 1 in the morning I heard it coming from near the window in my bedroom. I was about to turn off the light and go to bed, but the whistle cut through the stillness. It was short and low, almost like someone had whistled into a microphone set on low volume. I sat on the edge of my bed waiting to hear it again. My neck got stiff from how tense I felt. My pulse pounded in my ears. I waited. There was nothing else. I got up, walked over to the window, and looked outside. The streetlights were on, but I didn't see anyone. I didn't even see a cat or a passing car. It was just me staring into the dark. I felt exposed, like I was waiting for whoever made that sound to look up at me. I closed the window and locked it. I sat back down on my bed. I felt sweat under my arms and my palms were damp. I couldn't relax. I started checking for any logical explanation. I looked around for cracks or vents. Maybe there was a broken seal somewhere, causing the wind to whistle at certain angles. I went along the windows, pressed my ear near them, and felt for any breeze. Nothing. I checked the bathroom. I looked behind the shower head, opened the cabinet under the sink, tapped the pipes, and listened for any odd hiss. No luck. I didn't hear anything that matched that whistle. Every time I repeated those notes in my head, it sounded too close to a human voice. It had a weird calling quality. There's no better way to say it without sounding dramatic, but it felt like someone was trying to get my attention. One of the most disturbing moments happened the next morning. It was around 8 a.m. Dyer and I were in the shower. The water was hot, and I was still groggy. I wasn't thinking about anything except how good the water felt. Then I heard that whistle. It was softer this time, but it sounded like it was inside the bathroom with me. My entire body tensed, and I jumped. I remember almost slipping. The whistle came from behind me, near the corner of the shower, but there was nobody there. The water was running down my face, and my eyes stung from the shampoo. But I still tried to look around, half blind. My heart was hammering. I reached for the faucet and turned the water off. Then I stood there, dripping wet, listening. There was no other sound. I could hear my own breathing, which was ragged and shallow. I felt an urge to check the hallway, but I was standing there naked, so I grabbed a towel and rushed to my bedroom. The rest of the morning felt off. My hands were shaky, and I kept pausing to listen for more whistling. I tried to record it. One afternoon, I sat in my living room with my phone set to record. I let it run for a couple of hours while I did some errands around the house. I wanted proof that I wasn't crazy. I cleaned the kitchen, vacuumed the carpet, folded laundry, all while the phone was on the coffee table. I didn't hear anything during that time. Later, I played the recording back and scanned through it. There was nothing but the usual background hum. No whistle. I felt kind of stupid, like I was chasing a ghost, but then it happened again that night. I was in bed, staring at my ceiling, trying to doze off. My eyes were heavy, and my arms felt numb from lying in the same position. Then I heard it. The whistle was faint, almost a whisper, but it still had those 2 or 3 distinct notes. My eyes snapped open. I stared at the ceiling fan, my chest tightening. My mind was racing with questions. Who was doing that? Why me? Am I losing it? My breathing got shallow, and I could feel my pulse thumping in my temples. My mouth went dry. I got out of bed, turned on the lights in the hallway, and walked around the apartment. I checked every door, looked out the peephole, and even pushed the elevator button so I could peek at the empty car. Nothing. I walked back to my living room, turned on the lamp, and sat on the couch, waiting. I realized I was scared to turn off the lights. That was the first time I admitted to myself that this was real fear. The whistle started invading my thoughts during the day. I'd be at work, typing emails, and suddenly I'd remember the sound. My fingers would pause on the keyboard, and I'd get a tight feeling in my shoulders. I asked a coworker if they ever heard random whistling in old buildings, thinking maybe there was a common explanation. He shrugged and said, "Pipes, maybe wind in the vents." It wasn't helpful. I started feeling alone in this, like no one else could relate. I didn't want to come across as paranoid or weird, so I just let it go. A few days later, I came home a little earlier than usual. I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and opened the fridge, grabbing a soda. As soon as I cracked it open, I heard that whistle again. This time it was right outside my kitchen window, almost at ear level. I froze in place and felt my blood turn cold. I set the can down so hard that some of the soda spilled over the side. My hand was trembling. I turned off the kitchen light and stood next to the window, peering through the glass. It was still daylight, though the sun was low. I could see the trees across the street. The sidewalk was empty. The car drove by slowly, but no one was walking around. I didn't see a single person who could have made that sound. My stomach twisted. I felt nauseous. My eyes darted around, but I couldn't spot anything that made sense. Then the whistle happened again, shorter this time, like a clipped version of the same two notes. I stepped back, tripped over the edge of the rug, and nearly fell. I was shaking so badly that I could feel my knees wobble. That's when I decided to talk to the landlord. The next morning I caught him in the lobby. He was sorting through some letters. I asked him if there had been any complaints about strange noises. He frowned and said he hadn't heard anything like that. I told him about a whistling sound, low and echoing, almost like someone calling my name. He looked at me with confusion. He said no one else had reported anything. He suggested it might be the wind passing through a crack in the building's exterior. I insisted it sounded like a person. He just gave me a blank stare and said, "I'll keep an ear out." I didn't get any peace from that. The next few nights, I hardly slept. I'd lay in bed, my mind on high alert, listening for any hint of the whistle. Sometimes I'd hear a slight movement in the pipes or the distant hum of the elevator. Each time my muscles would tighten, and my breath would catch in my throat. On 2 different nights I sat up straight in bed because I thought I heard that same pattern of notes. But then everything went silent. I kept thinking about checking out a hotel for a night or two, just to see if I could sleep without that tension. But I worried that the moment I left, I'd miss my chance to figure out what was really happening. So I stayed. Another strange incident happened one evening when I was putting out the trash. I went down to the basement with my garbage bag, walked past the storage cages and opened the door that leads to the outdoor dumpster. Right before I tossed the bag in, I heard that whistle again, but it echoed in the cement hallway behind me. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I dropped the bag into the dumpster and walked back inside. My legs felt unsteady. The hallway lights flickered and everything smelled damp. I stood there for a moment, expecting someone to appear around the corner, but no one did. The whistle didn't repeat, and all I heard was the distant buzz of the fluorescent bulbs. I hurried back to the elevator. My pulse was in my throat the entire ride up. When the doors opened, I rushed to my apartment, locked the door, and leaned against it. I was breathing hard, almost panting. By now I've checked every window, door, and pipe in the apartment. I've looked under furniture, and I've even tried standing in different spots to see if some part of the floor creaks in a similar way. I got nothing. It doesn't matter if it's midday or midnight, that whistle can happen at any time, and it always sounds like it's right near me. It's never a long melody. It's just those 2 or 3 notes, always in the same tone, always making me feel like it's calling out, "Hey, you." In a low, gravelly voice, I feel jumpy. My nerves are shot. Sometimes my hands shake, and I get short of breath. My stomach feels knotted most of the time. I've caught myself pacing around the living room, trying to guess when it'll happen next. I don't know what else to do. I tried turning up the TV, wearing headphones, anything to block out the silence. But the moment there's a pause in the noise, I find myself straining to hear if the whistle is back. Last night was the worst so far. I was lying in bed, the lights off, just staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. Suddenly, I heard the whistle. It was close. It sounded like it was inside my bedroom, maybe near the closet. My heart felt like it stopped for a second. Then it pounded so hard that my chest hurt. I sat up, turned on my lamp, and looked around. The closet door was half open, and the clothes were hanging there still. The rest of the room was empty. I got out of bed and took a few slow steps toward the closet. My feet felt heavy against the carpet. My hands were clammy, and I was swallowing repeatedly because my mouth was dry. I looked inside, nothing but clothes, shoes, and some boxes. No sign of anyone, no sign of anything that could produce that whistle. I heard my own breathing, ragged and uneven. I didn't go back to bed for at least 2 hours. I can't explain any of this. I don't think it's a prank. I haven't told many people, and I have no enemies that I know of. No one has access to my apartment except me. The landlord has a spare key, but I trust him enough to think he wouldn't do something like this. And he's the one who seems puzzled by my questions. So I'm left with this constant unease. Every time I hear that whistle, my stomach flips, my skin crawls, and my mind starts racing with questions I can't answer. It's become impossible to relax. I feel like the walls are closing in whenever I'm alone with my thoughts. Now, when the silence sets in, I brace myself. I find myself holding my breath and clenching my jaw, expecting the whistle to break through at any second. I've never felt so on edge. I've considered moving out, But that feels like running away from something I can't even define. For now, I just keep my phone ready. I keep my lights on until I'm too tired to keep my eyes open. I jump at the sound of anything resembling a whistle in the distance. I've stopped feeling safe here, which is strange because this was always my peaceful retreat. All it took was one sound, repeated at unpredictable times, to make me doubt everything I thought I knew about this place. And every time I hear that familiar haunting pattern, my heart thunders in my chest, and I feel more alone than ever. I got home one Friday night and saw something that made my stomach tighten. The blind in my living room was raised halfway up, even though I had left it all the way down that morning. I checked my door. It was locked. I looked around. Nothing was out of place except for that blind, which should have been untouched. I stood there staring at it, trying to decide if someone had been in my apartment without my permission. I felt my neck tense. My pulse sped up. I wanted to believe it was a mechanical glitch, but I had tested that theory. Everything was normal, yet the blind was raised again. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a regular-looking building. It's nothing fancy. The walls are thin, the neighbors are mostly quiet, and the parking lot is usually half empty during the day. I work a regular 9-to-5 shift. I lock my door every morning. I flip the deadbolt, then double-check before leaving. I also keep my windows locked and my blinds lowered because the afternoon sun is brutal. My living room faces west, and the sunlight blasts in for hours if I leave anything open. My couch gets hot, my carpet feels like a radiator, so I make sure the blinds are down. It's a simple habit. About a month ago, I started noticing that when I came home, the blinds in the living room would be slightly raised. At first, it was about an inch. I just assumed maybe the cord had slipped. Then it started happening more noticeably, like a couple of inches or maybe half a foot. I thought there might be a problem with the little mechanism inside the top bar. I fiddled with it a few times. I pulled the cord down, locked it in place, and tugged it to make sure it stayed. It seemed fine. Then one day I came home, and the blind was raised almost half a meter. That's when I started getting really suspicious. I didn't see any evidence of forced entry. The windows were still locked from the inside, and the door was still locked, but something fell off. I checked every closet, every corner of my apartment. I opened the pantry. I even checked under my bed. Nobody was there. Nothing was missing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. I decided to test it one Friday by really making sure the blinds were all the way down. I inspected every cord. I took a moment to stare at each blind. Then I left for work like usual. I tried not to think about it all day. When I came home, the left blind in my living room was raised all the way to the midpoint of the window. That was impossible as far as I was concerned. I walked up to it and touched it. The slats were cool from the air conditioner's breeze, not from any outside wind. I looked at the cord. It was intact, with no fraying or sign of damage. The weight felt normal when I tested it, lifting it up and letting it drop again. I stood there in my living room, and my heart was pounding. I found myself sweating even though the AC was running. I checked the entire apartment again. No sign of anyone. No footprints, no items moved. My fridge door was closed, same as I'd left it. The bathroom was in order, and my closet door was slightly ajar. But that could have been me in the morning. Still, it felt like I wasn't alone, even though I obviously was. I heard the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and the faint sounds of the neighbors through the wall. But that was it. There was no sign of another presence. I locked every window and door a second time. Then I turned on the TV and tried to watch some random show to calm myself. But I couldn't stop staring at that blind. I decided to talk to my neighbor across the hall, Kevin. He's a middle-aged guy who wears a baseball cap all the time and sometimes walks around the parking lot smoking. I approached him the next day out in front of the building and said, "Hey, have you noticed anything weird in the building? Like someone coming in who shouldn't be here?" He shrugged and said he hadn't seen anything unusual, just the mail carrier and a couple of other tenants. He asked me why, and I told him about my blinds. He raised an eyebrow but didn't have much to say, except that maybe it was the maintenance guy. I hadn't called maintenance though, and I doubted the landlord would send someone without telling me. I thought about telling the landlord, but I wasn't sure if it would help. Maybe he'd say it was my problem, or maybe he'd say there was a draft. But I knew it wasn't the wind. If it were the wind, I'd expect to see the windows rattling or the blinds shifting in small movements, not suddenly raised half a meter. It felt deliberate. Over the next week, I kept finding the same thing. One or sometimes two blinds raised by the time I got home, always in the living room, always locked doors, no sign of anyone. It reached the point where I started feeling a rush of dread every time I put my key in the door. I would turn the knob, push the door open, and glance across the living room. My stomach would clench every time. Some days they stayed down, and I'd feel immediate relief. Other days, like Wednesday or Thursday, one of them would be raised. My scalp would prickle, and I'd feel this cold sensation in my arms. I checked the locks again and again, but everything seemed normal. I began to think about installing a small camera. I searched online for cheap indoor cameras that I could set up near the living room window. My logic was that I'd either catch someone on camera or see that nothing was happening except the blind raising on its own. In my head, I kept imagining that maybe I'd see the cord move by itself like a glitch or tension slip, but that didn't seem likely. I placed an order for a small wireless camera. It arrived in a couple of days. Meanwhile, every evening, I felt my heart race when I checked the blinds. On Monday night, I set up the camera. I placed it on the bookshelf facing the window. I tested it. It had a memory card and also connected to an app on my phone. I made sure it was working properly. I closed all the blinds, took a moment to confirm that every blind was fully lowered, and then I pressed the record button on the camera and left for work on Tuesday morning. My body was tense the entire day. I felt on edge. Normally, I don't think much about my apartment when I'm at work, but now I couldn't focus. I was worried. I kept wondering what I'd find later. I felt a mix of curiosity and dread. When I got home Tuesday evening, I unlocked the door and went inside. The living room was quiet. My blinds were exactly as I'd left them. Down, fully closed. I felt relieved. I double-checked. None of them had been moved. But the camera was still recording, so I decided to review the footage. I sat down on the couch and used the app on my phone to watch it. The video showed nothing but a still shot of the blinds for hours. Then, around noon, I could see a flicker of light as the sun shifted, but the blinds stayed put. No movement. No figure. Nobody stepped inside. I fast-forwarded through the day. It was just a silent recording of my empty living room. That was it. I left the camera in place for the rest of the week. Each day, I came home, checked the blinds, saw they were still all the way down, and reviewed hours of nothing on the footage. By Friday, I started to think maybe the problem was fixed, or maybe I'd imagined the entire thing. Then, the following Tuesday, it happened again. I came home and found the center blind in my living room raised a good foot above the windowsill. My first reaction was anger and fear. My cheeks got hot, and my heart beat so fast I could feel it in my neck. I rushed to the shelf to check the camera, but the camera was off. The power light was dark. I opened the app on my phone. No connection. I went to examine the device itself. The battery was drained. I realized I had forgotten to charge it after the weekend. I cursed under my breath. I had no footage for that day. I couldn't believe I had let that happen. I stood there staring at the blind for a long time, then lowered it again and plugged the camera into charge. I spent that entire night feeling paranoid and restless. The next day, I made sure the camera was plugged into a power outlet, not just running on battery. I tested it. It was recording. Everything was good to go. Then I left for work. This time, I didn't even wait to get all the way home. I checked the app on my lunch break to see if anything was happening live. The app showed a still image of my living room. The blinds looked fine. I sighed with relief, feeling a little ridiculous. I checked again at around 3 p.m. Still fine. Finally, I got home, expecting everything to be normal. But as soon as I opened the door, I saw the blind raised. My mind blanked for a second. I felt a sharp adrenaline rush. I went straight to the camera. It was unplugged from the outlet. The cord was lying on the floor. I felt a chill in my chest. I grabbed my phone and opened the app, which said the camera was offline. I stared at that cord. I didn't have any pets. There was no reason the cord would be pulled out of the wall on its own. My thoughts raced. I tried to think about neighbors, maintenance people, or maybe even an intruder with a key. But who would do that and not steal anything? Who would bother messing with my blinds and disconnecting the camera? I couldn't keep standing there. I had to check the entire apartment. I went into the kitchen. All the cabinets were shut. My dishes were where I left them. The fridge was closed. I ran to the bedroom. My bed was made. My closet door was still closed. My dresser drawers were untouched. The bathroom was the same as always. No sign of a break-in. The front door was locked when I arrived, and the windows were closed. The only weird thing was that damn blind and the unplugged camera. I wanted to pack my things and leave, but I didn't have anywhere to go. I don't have family close by, and I can't afford a hotel for more than a night or two. I realized I needed to talk to the landlord. I needed someone else to verify that I wasn't losing my mind. I called him, he answered and said he hadn't sent anyone to my unit. He told me that if there was no damage, he couldn't do much. He suggested maybe I call the police if I suspected a break-in. I considered it, but I had no proof. No forced entry, no missing property, just a blind that kept getting raised. That night I tried to stay calm. I put the camera back in place, plugged it in securely, and used tape to make sure it wouldn't pop out of the outlet. I even set my phone to record video from across the room, propped up on a chair. It felt silly, but I was determined. I went to work the next morning, dreading what I might find later. In the afternoon, I checked the camera feed. It showed my living room. The blinds were down. Everything was normal. Around 1 p.m., I watched it live for a few minutes. Nothing changed. By 3 p.m., I checked again, and the feed was offline. My heart sank. I finished my shift as fast as I could, then drove home. When I got there, the camera was still plugged into the wall, but it was turned off. I pressed the power button, and it powered on again as if someone had manually switched it off. The blind was raised just a few inches this time. I touched the power button on the camera and realized it didn't take much force to press it. Someone could have done that easily. I looked around, half expecting someone to step out from behind the couch, but there was nothing. I felt my throat tighten, and my palms were sweating. I wanted to scream or punch a wall. Instead, I sat on the couch and stared at the blind for a while. I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? Someone keeps coming in here raising a blind and turning off my camera, but not stealing anything or breaking anything. I didn't think they'd take me seriously. That night I considered sleeping in my car, but I knew that made no sense. I was exhausted though. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. My mind was racing, but my body was heavy. Eventually I just set the camera to record again, locked my bedroom door from the inside, and went to bed. I didn't sleep well. I kept waking up, listening for sounds, checking my phone to see if the camera feed was active. It stayed on until morning. On Saturday, I told Kevin about what was happening again. He looked concerned. He said, "Maybe I should change my locks." I thought about that. It might help or it might not. Haven't done it yet though. I feel stuck. Too scared to see what's on any recording if I ever manage to keep the camera on long enough. But I also want proof of what's going on. I've started leaving certain small objects in front of the door to see if they move while I'm gone. So far, they haven't budged. The only thing that keeps changing is that blind in the living room. I wish I had an explanation. A rational part of me wants to blame a technical issue, but I've checked everything. The other part of me wonders if someone has a spare key or if there's a hidden access to my apartment. I've looked everywhere and can't find any vents or crawl spaces that would allow someone to sneak in. I feel tense all the time. My shoulders ache from being on edge. I can't focus at work, and my boss told me I seemed distracted. I just lied and said I was dealing with personal stuff. Right now the blinds are down, and the door is locked. The camera is plugged in, and I've taped over the power button to prevent it from being pressed. Tomorrow, I'll see if that makes a difference. I don't know if I'll catch anything. I'm not even sure if I want to. Part of me is terrified of seeing a person on that footage calmly walking into my apartment, messing with my blinds and then shutting off my camera. That idea makes my hands shake. I don't know what's worse, finding out it's a person or realizing it's something else I can't explain. Either way, I feel my heart hammer in my chest every time I think about it. For now, I just wait. I keep going to work. I keep locking up. I keep checking the camera. I haven't called the police yet, nor have I told my family or many people at all. I'm trying to solve it on my own, despite feeling a knot in my gut every single day. That's the story so far. My blinds keep getting raised, but nothing else is touched. My camera keeps getting turned off whenever it might catch something. There's no sign of forced entry. I live alone, and I'm running out of logical explanations. I'm tired, nervous, and frustrated. This thing won't stop. I just hope that whatever is happening doesn't escalate. For now, I'm doing what I can, testing my locks, keeping my camera running, and trying not lose my mind. That's all I've got. I don't know how it ends, or if I'll ever have a normal day again in this apartment. but I'm holding out for one. I walked into that old gym on a Wednesday night already tired from work. The place smelled like stale sweat and rubber. The lights in the lobby flickered whenever the front door opened. I had no idea that night would change the way I felt about locker rooms forever. I just wanted to do my routine, grab a quick shower, and head home. Instead, I got something that still makes my neck tense whenever I think about it. Let me back up a bit. I've been going to this gym for a few months. It's nothing fancy. The paint on the walls has faded, and the equipment is older than some of the regulars. There's a squat rack, a few benches, a set of dumbbells, and some machines that squeak now and then. The locker room looks worn out. Chipped tiles, a musty smell that even the strongest bleach can't remove, and lockers that clang loudly when people open or close them. Most of the time I don't mind. The membership is cheap, and the people here don't bother me. I usually train at night, because I like having space in a quiet environment. That particular night, I arrived around 8. The gym was set to close at 10. The parking lot was mostly empty. I noticed only one other car in the far corner. Inside, I only saw the front desk guy scrolling on his phone. He nodded at me when I swiped my membership card. I walked through the small hallway that led to the men's locker room. The hallway light buzzed overhead, giving off a dull fluorescent hum. My shoes squeaked on the linoleum. The air had an old, locked-in smell that I'd gotten used to over the months. I pushed open the door to the locker room. The overhead lights inside were bright, but they always felt a little harsh on my eyes after coming from the dim hallway. The tile floor was stained around the drains, and the grey lockers lined the walls. The room seemed empty. No voices, no movement. I headed to my usual locker near the entrance to the showers. I set my gym bag on the bench, unzipped it, and started taking out my water bottle and towel. Then I heard something. It was very faint. It sounded like people talking in low voices. I stopped what I was doing and listened. The noise came from the direction of the showers. I turned my head, trying to focus. I couldn't make out words. It was just low, steady murmuring, like more than one person was having a private conversation. The gym was almost empty, so that was odd. I called out, "Hello?" and got nothing back. The voices kept going, at least for a few seconds. I felt my pulse pick up and my mouth went dry. I didn't want to overreact, but it seemed strange. I took a step closer to the shower area. The floor was wet, and I heard a light drip from one of the faucets. I peeked around the corner. Nobody was there. Just the rows of shower stalls, half of them with curtains, half of them open. The air was thick and kind of humid. The fluorescent light above me made a slight flicker which put a jump in my chest. I tried to breathe slowly, or didn't see a single person, but the hair on my arms stood up. That whispering or whatever it was seemed to fade away the moment I looked into the shower area. I sniffed the air, smelled a bit of soap residue, maybe old steam. I tried to find some rational explanation. Maybe the sound came from the pipes or from outside. I didn't want to spook myself for no reason, so I shook it off and told myself I was just hearing things. I walked back to my locker, took out my phone, and checked if I had any messages.
Nothing important.
I changed into my workout clothes, feeling a bit uneasy, but deciding to ignore it. Before leaving the locker room, I looked over my shoulder at the shower area. Nothing but that slow drip of water. I headed out to the weight room. The place was mostly empty, with only 2 other people scattered among the machines. One guy was on the bench press. Another was on the rowing machine in the corner. I did my normal routine. Squats, overhead presses, a few sets of deadlifts. My legs felt heavy that night. My heart wasn't fully in it. My mind kept going back to those weird whispers. I wondered if the 2 guys in the weight room had been showering earlier, but then I realized I didn't see them come out of the locker room. Maybe they had finished before I arrived. I didn't know. I pushed through my sets, focusing on my breathing. The clang of weights gave me a decent distraction. After about 45 minutes, I was done. I finished by doing some stretches near the free weights rack. My shirt was soaked with sweat, and my arms and legs felt pumped. Normally, I'd head straight to the shower, but the memory of those whispers hovered in the back of my mind. I glanced at the wall clock. It was almost 9. I figured I still had time. As I walked back toward the locker room, I passed the front desk guy who was starting to count the cash drawer. I decided to ask him if he'd heard anything. "Hey, were you in the locker room earlier?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, man," he said. "I've been up here the whole time." "Why?" I shrugged. I just thought I heard some people talking, but there was nobody there. He laughed and said, maybe I was just tired. I didn't push it. I just walked on, feeling a hint of embarrassment. When I stepped into the locker room again, I noticed right away that the air felt stuffy and heavy. It was that same humid, stale feeling, like the showers had been running for a long time without proper ventilation. The light seemed a bit dimmer, though I think it was just my imagination. I walked to my locker and grabbed a clean towel from my bag. I stood there, thinking whether I should shower at home instead. But I hated the idea of driving 20 minutes all sweaty, so I decided to at least check the showers one more time. I walked carefully toward the shower area, my shoes squeaking on the damp tiles. The dripping was louder now, but there was also that other sound. It was like voices again, but very soft. I felt my chest tighten. My palms got sweaty and my throat felt dry. My eyes darted around, checking every stall. I saw no feet. I heard no actual words, just a murmur. I wiped my forehead. My heart was pounding. Then for a split second, I thought I caught a distinct sound, like a laugh or a sigh. It echoed against the tile walls. My stomach flipped. I stepped back. I almost slipped on the wet floor, but I caught myself on the wall. My breath was shallow and fast. I tried to talk myself down, telling myself it was just the pipes, but that didn't feel right. I hadn't heard anything like that in the months I'd been coming here. I moved closer to the nearest shower stall, pulled the curtain aside. The floor was slick, but empty. The drain had a slow swirl of water. I stepped away and checked the others. Nothing. There was no reason for those sounds. I stood there for a good minute, trying to decide if I should keep investigating or just leave. My hands trembled slightly. I could feel my heartbeat in my temples. The voices, or whatever they were, seemed to fade again, like they only got loud when I wasn't looking directly at the stalls. This creeped me out even more. I took a deep breath and forced myself to walk back to my locker. I grabbed my bag and changed out of my gym clothes. My plan was to skip the shower.
I wanted to get out of there, but as I pulled my jeans on, I started thinking about how sweaty I was.
I had an important meeting the next day, and I didn't want to deal with sweaty clothes in my car. I finally decided, screw it. I'll take the fastest shower ever. I walked back into the shower area, forcing myself to keep my eyes forward. I chose the stall closest to the exit, turned on the water, and let it heat up. The water pressure was weak. It made a dripping and hissing noise as it sprayed from the old shower head. I was afraid to close the curtain, but I did it anyway, because I felt weird standing there with it wide open. Then I just stood under the water trying to stay calm. The water wasn't very warm, but I didn't care. I just wanted to rinse off. About 10 seconds later, I heard the whispers again. They were so quiet that I could barely pick them up over the water. But they were there, that low mumbling. I shivered. My skin was covered in goosebumps. My breath caught in my throat. I could feel my chest tighten even more. I looked around. All I saw was the damped tile walls and my towel hanging on the hook. The voices seemed to come from the stall next to mine. But when I turned off the water for a second, hoping to listen more clearly, the voices went silent. I stood there, water dripping from my hair, my eyes fixed on the tiles. All I heard was the soft plink of droplets in the drain. My heart pounded so hard that my chest felt hollow. I turned the water back on, wanting to hurry up. After rinsing, I shut it off again, yanked the curtain aside, and reached for my towel. That's when I heard the faintest sound, like a quiet laugh coming from behind me. I spun around, but nobody was there. I bolted from the shower area, practically stumbling onto the wet floor. I wrapped the towel around my waist and rushed to my locker. My hands shook as I unlocked it. I got dressed so fast I nearly twisted my ankle pulling on my shoes. My mouth was dry, and I felt a dull ache in my shoulders from all the tension. I grabbed my bag and walked out of that locker room without looking back. I passed by the front desk on my way out. The employee asked if I was okay, probably noticing my freaked out expression, but I just forced a nod and kept walking. When I got to my car, I sat in the driver's seat for a minute, trying to calm down. I kept replaying the sounds in my head. It wasn't just a single voice, it felt like multiple conversations overlapped in those showers, but I never saw a single person. The more I thought about it, the more unsettled I got. I drove home and took another shower there because I felt like I couldn't trust the one I'd just taken. My muscles were tight. I could still feel the humidity clinging to my skin. I went to bed late that night, tossing and turning, thinking about what I'd heard. The next day at work, I tried to forget about it. I told myself it was just my imagination, maybe caused by exhaustion or the echo of water pipes, but deep down, I knew it had felt real. I told a couple of friends in passing, but they just shrugged. They said old buildings have weird acoustics, or maybe someone was pulling a prank. No one seemed to take it seriously. Over the next few weeks, I kept going to the gym at night, but I avoided the showers. I finished my workout, grabbed my bag, and drove home. I got used to the smell of my own sweat during the ride. It wasn't pleasant, but it beat standing alone in that locker room. One night, I tried to reason with myself again. I walked in around 9 p.m. and saw that the place was almost empty as usual. I trained, did my sets, and finished around 9. Then I lingered in the locker room entrance just to see if I heard anything again. Sure enough, there was that subtle murmur. It sent a chill up my spine. I turned around and left without going any farther. For a while, I thought maybe it was just the echo of voices from earlier in the day, somehow bouncing around the pipes or the ventilation system. The tile walls could carry sound in odd ways. But no matter how I tried to explain it, that thick, tense feeling I got every time I went near the showers never disappeared. My muscles would tighten, my hands would sweat, and my legs would feel shaky. The air in there always felt stuffy, even when I knew the fans were on. It was like the room itself was storing up old conversations, letting them leak out when nobody else was around. I brought it up to the front desk guy again. He just shrugged and said he hadn't noticed anything. Maybe the place is old, he said. Could be water in the pipes or the ventilation picking up noise from another part of the building. I tried to accept that explanation, but my gut said something else was going on. At one point, I tried going in the morning to see if it felt different. I arrived around 7 a.m., but I was half asleep and not happy about the change in my schedule. The locker room was busier then, full of guys getting ready for work. I didn't hear or feel anything strange. The space seemed normal, just people rushing around with towels and soap, water running, lockers banging. But returning at night brought back that heavy, silent tension. Eventually, I stopped taking my shower there altogether. I'd show up in my workout clothes, leave with them drenched in sweat, and head straight home. The staff never questioned me about it, and I never volunteered any more information. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but I also didn't want to push my luck. Something about those whispers felt off. I couldn't prove anything, but every time I stepped into that place alone, my skin prickled. I still go to the gym. It's cheaper than the others around town, and the equipment works fine for what I need, but I don't stay after my routine anymore. I grab my things and leave before they close. I have this lingering sensation that the locker room walls are holding on to something. The dripping water, the flickering lights, the soft murmuring. Those details get stuck in my head whenever I think about that place late at night. I can't fully explain it. Maybe it's all in my head. Maybe I was just tired and my ears played tricks on me. But I know what I heard, and I can't forget the feeling of that humid air closing in around me, carrying voices that didn't belong to anyone. Still there. I have no proof, and I'm not interested in getting any. For now, I shower at home. That's how I deal with it. I keep my head down, do my workout, and leave. And if I ever hear another whisper in that locker room, I'm not sticking around to investigate. I've learned my lesson. I never expected to feel uneasy in my own home office. I always liked that space. A small room at the end of the hallway with my desk, shelf, and comfortable chair. It felt safe, private, and convenient. That changed when I noticed the money in my desk drawer wasn't staying put the way I left it.
At first, I figured I was just sloppy. Maybe I dropped a coin or crumpled a bill by accident.
But I started paying closer attention. My small stash of loose change and a few small bills seemed different from one day to the next. Sometimes there was less. Sometimes there was more. That's when I began to feel that tight knot in my stomach every time I opened the drawer. I'm not a superstitious guy, but I had no explanation. My office is pretty simple. A tall wooden bookshelf next to the window, a standard office chair that squeaks sometimes, and a large wooden desk with 3 drawers on the right side. I usually keep the top drawer locked because it has some personal documents, but the middle drawer is where I keep a little coin purse and folded bills, about 30 to 50 euros in total. It's enough to cover quick lunches, small groceries, or taxi fare if I need it. I never cared about it much because it wasn't a huge amount of money. It was just convenient to have change at hand. That's why I didn't lock that drawer. I never had a reason to. The first time I noticed something was off, I had returned from the grocery store. I threw some coins in the purse, shut the drawer, and went on with my day. When I sat down at the desk later, I pulled out the drawer to grab a pen. Immediately, I saw a couple of coins lying at the bottom of the drawer outside the purse. The purse itself looked crumpled, and its zipper was slightly open. I wondered if I'd just tossed the coins too carelessly. Maybe I'd been rushing, and they slipped out. I shrugged, picked them up, and put them back. I zipped the purse and forgot about it. It didn't feel threatening or strange at the time. It just seemed messy. I didn't think twice, but then it kept happening. Every few days, I'd notice coins outside the purse or a bill partially sticking out. One afternoon, I came home from an errand and saw a $10 bill folded into a tight little rectangle that I definitely hadn't done. I like to fold my bills in half, neatly. This was a weird, crumpled shape. I felt a tiny flicker of concern in my chest, but I told myself I was being paranoid. I convinced myself I must have handled it differently, or stuffed the money in there while I was on the phone or distracted by something else. Soon, I started making sure to arrange the bills in a certain order, biggest to smallest. I wanted to see if they stayed that way. 2 days later, I checked and found the order reversed with the smaller bills in front. My breath caught. That moment was the first time I thought, maybe someone's messing with me. I live alone, but sometimes I have a housekeeper who comes once a week to tidy up. I couldn't imagine her rummaging through my desk, especially for such a small amount of money. She's never given me any reason to distrust her, and I've known her for a year. Besides, the sums weren't exactly big enough to risk losing a job over. Still, I decided to keep an eye on it. I wanted to be absolutely sure. One day I counted everything in the drawer. 32 rays, 12,020 real notes, 110 real notes, and 2 1 real coins. I made a note of the exact amount. Then I went out for lunch, locked the house, and drove to my usual place. It was a normal lunch, nothing out of the ordinary. When I got back about an hour later, I went straight to my office. I pulled the drawer open and saw that the money was out of place again. The 2 coins sat neatly on top of the folded notes like someone had balanced them there. My pulse sped up. I picked them up and recounted. There were only 30 reals now. The 10 real note and the 20 were still there, but I was missing 2 reals and 1 coin. That made no sense, because I saw the coins lying on top. So, I did a more careful count. I realized I had the 20, the 10, and only 1 coin. The other coin wasn't there. I also realized that the notes had been moved around. It was subtle, but they didn't feel stacked the way I'd left them. I started to sweat because I had no explanation. I didn't see signs of forced entry. My front door was locked. My windows were closed. The housekeeper wasn't due until the following day. I stood there staring at the money, feeling my stomach churn. My hands were trembling a bit, and I felt a strange sensation, like the back of my neck was cold. I told myself to calm down. Maybe I'd made a mistake in my own counting. I tried to think of something else, but deep down it felt impossible that I had just messed up basic arithmetic. I knew what I saw before lunch. Over the next few days, I grew more anxious. I decided to lock the drawer. It has a small built-in lock. Nothing fancy, but enough to keep it secure. The next morning, I checked the money again before locking it. This time, I had about $33 in total, counting some extra coins. I wrote that on a piece of paper and folded the paper into my wallet. Then I locked the drawer, making sure the key was with me. I felt a slight sense of relief, like I was taking control of the situation. All day long, I worked in the living room on my laptop instead of at my desk. I wanted to see if maybe there was some weird draft or if the drawer might have a gap that let coins slip out. That seemed ridiculous, but I was desperate for a logical answer. In the late afternoon, I went back to the office. The drawer was still locked. The lock didn't show any scratches or signs of tampering. I inserted the key, turned it, and opened the drawer. The coin purse looked untouched at first glance. But when I took out the money to count it, I got a surprise. Instead of $33, I found there was a new $2 bill that definitely hadn't been there before. I stood there, my mouth hanging open. That freaked me out because it wasn't just missing money now. It was added money. Someone or something had access to my locked drawer without damaging it. I couldn't wrap my head around that. I felt my heart pounding. I rubbed my arms because they felt cold even though the room was warm. I didn't hear any footsteps or sense any presence. There was no strange smell, no odd creaking, nothing that gave me a hint of how this was happening. But it kept happening. Day after day, I tried different things. I stopped using the coin purse and just laid the money flat. I'd count it, lock the drawer, and step away. When I came back hours later, the total was never the same. Sometimes I'd lose a dollar bill. Sometimes I'd gain a $2 bill. It wasn't huge amounts. Usually it was just $1 or $2 changing hands. But the unpredictability rattled me. At one point, I wondered if I was having gaps in my memory. I was worried I might be sleepwalking or something, but I never left the desk unlocked, and I never found any evidence of me tampering with it myself. I started checking the timestamps on my phone's camera, taking a picture of the money before I locked up, and then another after I unlocked. Each time the photos showed different configurations, the money's arrangement would be shifted. Sometimes a coin would be balanced on top of a bill. Sometimes the bills would be folded in weird ways. I got frustrated and angry. I felt my teeth clench whenever I approached my office. I tested the door, windows, and ventilation system. There wasn't any secret passage or anything unusual. Everything seemed normal, except for this bizarre money situation. I tried telling a friend on the phone about it. I kept my tone casual, but I'm sure he heard the tension in my voice. He suggested I install a cheap security camera, so I got a small one that connects to Wi-Fi. I placed it on a shelf where it had a clear angle on the desk. The lens faced the drawer, and I made sure it could record all day. I tested it by standing in front of it, opening the drawer, and checking if it captured everything. It seemed fine. That gave me some hope. I figured I'd catch whoever or whatever was messing around. For the first day, nothing changed. I locked the drawer in the morning, left the camera recording, and stayed out of the room. That evening I checked the feed. The drawer stayed closed all day. No movement. No one entered. I felt a momentary sense of relief, but when I unlocked it to count the money, I found I had one extra coin. It made no sense because the footage showed zero activity. I played it back on my laptop 3 times. No one approached the drawer. It was like it changed on its own. On the second day, I moved the camera closer. I aimed it right at the drawer handle, so if there was even the slightest movement, I'd see it. I placed a piece of tape in a straight line across the drawer's gap. If someone tried to open it, the tape would tear or come off. That afternoon, I left the house for a quick trip to the supermarket. When I came back, the tape looked intact. The camera was still running, but when I checked the money, there was a coin missing again. I scanned through the recording, there was nothing. It was like a skip in reality. 1 minute everything was still, the next minute I came in and found the money changed. I felt my hands shaking with anger and fear. My shoulders tensed up, and I had trouble breathing evenly. I didn't know what else to do. Every time I opened the drawer, I expected something to jump out at me. I half expected some unseen figure to be crouching under the desk or behind the door. I checked behind the curtains, inside the closet, everywhere. Nothing. The rest of the house was perfectly normal. Nothing else went missing, and nothing appeared out of nowhere except inside that drawer. That night, I locked my bedroom door because I was so on edge. I didn't sleep well. I kept expecting to hear footsteps or the drawer opening. I never heard any sound. I'd jolt awake around 3 or 4 in the morning, covered in sweat. My heart would be racing, and I'd step into the hallway to check the office. Nothing was ever out of place until I decided to open that drawer again. One evening, I put the desk key in a little box in my bedroom drawer just in case. The next morning, I woke up, got ready, had coffee in the kitchen, then slowly walked to my office. The first thing I did was glance at the drawer. Nothing was disturbed on the outside. I felt a nervous tingle in my arms as I reached for the lock. My fingers struggled to fit the key because I was shaking. I took a few breaths. Then I got it open. The coin purse was wide open, and 2 coins were sitting on the desk surface like someone had placed them there after removing them from the drawer. My entire body went cold. I slammed the drawer shut and just stood there, my mind whirling. I still can't explain any of this. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? There was no break-in, and the amounts of money involved were small. I could see the cops looking at me like I was a lunatic. I also considered moving out of the house or renting an office elsewhere, but the cost would be too high for me. And it's not like I'm in physical danger, at least it doesn't feel that way. It's more that I can stand not knowing how it's happening. Even now, as I tell this story, my stomach feels tense. I don't like unlocking that drawer, Sometimes I leave it locked for days, ignoring whatever might be happening inside. But every so often, I check again. I can help myself. I keep hoping you'll find a logical explanation. Each time I count the money before I leave, I find that the drawer is locked, and when I come back, a coin is gone, or a new bill has been added. I've tried leaving no money in there, but even then, I open it to find a small coin that wasn't there before. Once I left exactly 0 reais. Then I came back to find a 1 real coin. It's almost like some invisible person is playing a game with me. I don't know if I'll ever understand what's going on. The house is quiet, and everything else is normal. But whenever I step into that office, I feel uneasy. My shoulders get tight and my breathing goes shallow. I can't make sense of it, and I hate that. I've considered selling the desk or replacing the drawer, but that feels extreme. Yet, the idea of continuing with this mystery freaks me out too. That's pretty much where I'm at now. I feel watched even though I haven't seen or heard anyone. Sometimes I half expect to catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, but there's nothing there. The lock stays intact, the camera footage stays clean, and the money changes. It's not consistent. Sometimes nothing happens for days. Then out of nowhere, I check and there's more or less money than before. I've stopped trying to record it every single day because it was driving me crazy. But I still keep the coin purse in there like a test. And the same thing keeps happening. I'm just glad it's only money. I worry that maybe this presence, whatever it is, could decide to mess with other things in the house. So far, it's just focusing on the drawer. It adds or removes small amounts and leaves no trace. I've tried to keep calm. I go through my normal routine. Work, errands, occasional social outings. But whenever I come home and head to my office, my heart starts to pound. My legs feel weak when I stand at the desk. I always wonder if this time the money will be gone, or doubled, or scattered. Usually it's just a slight difference, but that's enough to send a chill through me. I'm not the superstitious type, and I'm not interested in ghost stories or anything like that. I just know what I see. The fact that I can't explain it makes me anxious. I try not to let it dominate my thoughts, but it's hard. Every time I count the money, my hands shake a little, and I feel sweat beating on my forehead. It's like I'm bracing myself for something that never fully happens. The drawer is always quiet. The camera never shows anything, and the door stays locked. Still, the money changes. That's all I can say. It's real. It's happening in my house. I can't deny the physical evidence. My plan is to keep everything as normal as possible, even though part of me wants to throw the entire desk out onto the street. But I won't. I'll just live with it for now. Maybe it'll stop someday. Maybe I'll wake up one day and find the drawer empty or stuffed with random coins. At this point, nothing would surprise me. All I know is that I've got a locked drawer, a key in my pocket, and money that won't stay the same. And that's enough to keep me on edge every single day. I'll never forget the first time I saw that flicker in the corridor. It was around 10 at night, and I was taking a small bag of trash out to the bin. My house is a typical row house, and there's this narrow side corridor that leads to the laundry area in the back. Months ago, the light bulb in that corridor burned out. I disconnected it and never bothered to replace it. But that night I glanced up at the spot where the bulb used to be, and I saw a faint pulse of light. It lasted maybe 2 seconds. My heart pounded. I stood there in the dark, holding a plastic bag and staring at the empty socket. It had no bulb. It was just an open socket. I told myself it had to be a reflection from somewhere, maybe a neighbor's porch light at an odd angle, or a car's headlights passing by. It didn't make sense, but I had to believe there was some ordinary explanation. I stared for a few moments longer, then tossed the trash into the bin and went back inside. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was nothing. A few days later, I was in the kitchen. I noticed we were out of paper towels, so I went to the laundry area to look for a spare roll. It was close to midnight. I keep late hours, and sometimes I do random chores before bed. As soon as I stepped into the corridor, I felt a chill. The night air was cool, but this was different. My skin tingled, and a rush of adrenaline made my chest tighten. I tried to ignore it, and kept moving. The corridor was dark as usual, no bulb in the fixture. I looked up, and at first I saw nothing. But the moment I turned the corner to step into the laundry area, I saw that flicker again in the corner of my eye. It was so weak that if I'd blinked, I would have missed it. But I definitely saw it. I walked back to the corridor, looked at the socket on the underside of the low overhang, and could barely see it in the dim glow from my kitchen window. The corridor itself was in shadow, but there was this faint shimmer like the glow of a dying flashlight. I stepped forward until I was right below the socket. My pulse was pounding so loud that I heard my heartbeat in my ears. I reached up and felt around. The metal threads inside the socket were empty. No bulb at all. I yanked my hand back and stood there breathing hard. The light was gone by that point, so I turned around and went back inside. My hands were shaking when I tried to open the laundry cabinet. That night, I tossed and turned, keeping replaying that moment in my head. I told myself again it might just be a reflection from somewhere, but I couldn't figure out what would cause it. The corridor is narrow, blocked by my fence on one side and the wall on the other. There's no opening for a car's headlights to shine through. The neighbor's motion light is on the opposite side of their property, and it doesn't cast any light onto my corridor. I considered the possibility of some weird electrical short, but there's no bulb, and I've seen no sparks or anything like that. It was just a faint glow. It didn't make sense. About a week passed. I avoided going into that corridor at night unless I absolutely had to. I didn't mention anything to friends or family. I just pretended everything was normal, but one night I had to take some recycling out. I planned to go earlier, but I got caught up in a phone call and lost track of time, so it was past 11 when I finally walked out there. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were a distant hum of traffic and the rustle of some leaves against a fence. I flipped on the kitchen light so it would give me a bit of illumination through the window. Then I headed out. I didn't see anything right away. I dropped the small recycling bin near the main trash can, then turned around, heading back. That's when I spotted a faint pulse. This time it lasted maybe 5 seconds. It was enough to light up part of the wall in the ground below the socket. I froze, my arms felt heavy, and my scalp prickled. I walked closer, one slow step at a time. The light blinked out before I got there. I reached up and touched the socket again. Still empty. The corridor smelled a bit musty, like wet concrete. I could hear my own breathing a bit faster than usual. I took out my phone and tried to record. I held it up toward the socket and pressed the record button. I waited. Nothing happened. I waited longer, maybe a full minute. Still nothing. My arms were starting to ache from holding the phone in position. Eventually, I stopped recording. The moment I lowered my phone, a sudden brief flash of light lit the corridor. It was so fast that when I looked at my phone screen, it barely showed a flicker. The camera didn't capture the details. All I saw in the footage was a sudden white blur that lasted half a second. It didn't look like much of anything. I reviewed that video over and over. It didn't prove anything to me except that there was some flash, but it could have been interpreted as a camera glitch. I knew better, but I didn't know how to explain it. I kept the video in my gallery anyway, half hoping I could show someone eventually, but I decided to keep quiet. I didn't want people looking at me like I was losing my mind. A few more weeks passed. During that time, I replaced a few other bulbs in the house. I almost bought a new bulb for the corridor, but something about it made me hesitant. Part of me didn't want to put a bulb in the socket. I wasn't sure why. Maybe I didn't want to mess with whatever was happening. Or maybe I just felt uneasy about standing on a step stool in that narrow space. Every time I thought about being alone in that corridor, I felt my stomach churn. One afternoon, I decided to check the wiring. I'm not an electrician, but I know how to switch off the circuit breakers. I turned off the power to that outside fixture and used a small screwdriver to remove the socket cover. The wires looked normal. No burn mark, no loose connection. Everything was in order. I replaced the cover and flipped the breaker back on. I stood outside in broad daylight, looking up at that empty socket, feeling confused. I felt no fear in daylight. It looked like an ordinary fixture just missing a bulb. I almost laughed at myself, but as soon as darkness fell, I started dreading the idea of going out there. I tried to keep myself busy in the living room, watching some random late-night TV, scrolling through social media, answering a few emails. Around midnight, I realized I'd left the broom outside by the laundry door earlier. I needed it because the kitchen floor was dusty, and I wanted to sweep up before bed. I had no choice but to step into the corridor again. I opened the door, and the air felt cold against my face. My shoulders tensed. My legs felt a bit weak. I could see the broom's handle leaning against the wall near the laundry entrance. I walked carefully, focusing on my own footsteps. They made a light scraping sound on the concrete. I grabbed the broom without looking up, but then I heard a slight crackling noise like a static discharge. I stood still. My breathing got shallow. I felt the hair on my arms stand up. I looked up at the socket. There was a soft glow forming in the center. It wasn't bright, but it spread just enough to illuminate the nearby wall and part of the floor. My brain struggled to make sense of it. It was like a tiny light source floating where the bulb should have been. I didn't see filaments or anything, just a soft flickering glow. It lasted maybe 3 or 4 seconds this time. Then it was gone. I felt my pulse hammering and realized I was gripping the broom handle so tightly that my fingers hurt. I couldn't move for a moment. I stood there, scanning the edges of the corridor, trying to see if there was a reflection somewhere. There was nothing but the plain fence and walls. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the socket. Once I was a few steps away, I turned and hurried inside. I locked the door. I checked the windows to make sure nothing else was out there. I stood in my kitchen, feeling like my heart was about to burst out of my chest. I splashed water on my face in the sink. I told myself it could be a weird reflection, but deep down, I couldn't see how. It was always in the same spot where that burned-out bulb used to be. After that, I started leaving the corridor alone as much as possible. I'd throw my trash bags out earlier in the evening while it was still light. I moved some of my cleaning supplies indoors so I wouldn't have to go back there at night. I even started doing laundry earlier in the day. But sometimes I had no choice. Trash day might fall on a night, or I might forget something. Each time I stepped into the corridor with my heart racing, scanning that space near the roof, it didn't always happen. Sometimes there was no flicker, but other times I'd see a flash or a weak glow that would vanish as soon as I tried to look closer. I considered telling a neighbor, but I didn't know them well. We just say hi in passing, and I figured they wouldn't believe me. I contemplated calling an electrician, but I wasn't even sure what I'd tell them. Could you check the empty socket where I keep seeing light except there's no bulb and it only happens at night? That seemed ridiculous. I also thought about ignoring it entirely. That it was hard to ignore something that made me tense every time I stepped outside. One night I decided I had to try getting more solid video evidence. I set up my phone on a small tripod, aimed straight at the socket. I plugged in a cheap spotlight in the laundry area to keep the rest of the corridor somewhat visible. I left the phone recording for a full hour while I stayed inside. After that, I checked the footage. The entire clip showed nothing but the dark corridor, with the spotlight shining from the side. There was no flicker, no strange flash, nothing out of the ordinary. It looked like a normal empty corridor the whole time. Frustrated, I tried again on a different night. Around the same time I usually saw the light. This time I turned off the laundry spotlight. I relied on the dim glow from my kitchen window. I recorded for another hour. I fast-forwarded through the footage, scanning for any sign of a flash. I saw nothing. Near the end I heard a weird sound in the audio track, like a soft crackle. But there was no visible light on the camera. Maybe the crackle was just the mic picking up wind or the fence rustling. I couldn't capture it, but I still saw it in person from time to time, enough to keep me on edge. Every night, I'd double-check all my doors, turn off the interior lights, and then peek out the window to see if the corridor was dark. Usually, I couldn't see anything from that angle, but I'd watch for a minute or two, half hefting a sudden glimmer. I never caught it that way. It only showed up when I was actually in the corridor, standing there. Eventually, I realized I couldn't keep living in constant tension. I decided to act more directly. I bought a new LED bulb at the hardware store. Nothing fancy, just a standard outdoor LED. One Saturday afternoon, I grabbed my step stool and installed it. The fixture seemed fine. The new bulb screwed in without any problem. I flipped the switch in the laundry area. The LED turned on, illuminating the corridor with a crisp white light. I felt relief. I thought maybe that would end the weird flickers. That night, I left the corridor light on. Around 11, I went outside. Everything was brightly lit. No strange glow, no flicker. It was just a normal corridor again. I felt my muscles relax. I did the same thing the next night. No issues. For about a week, I kept that light on all evening, and I saw nothing unusual. I started to think maybe that solved the problem. But one night, I decided to turn off the corridor light before bed. It was late, and I wanted to save electricity. The moment I flipped the switch, the corridor went dark. I stared at the new bulb. It was definitely in place. I turned around to step back inside, but then I noticed a faint shimmer forming near the overhang. The new bulb was off. yet there was a small circle of pale light just underneath it. My jaw clenched, and I felt a ripple of panic in my chest. I turned the switch on again. The corridor flooded with LED light, and the shimmer disappeared. Now I leave that corridor light on most nights. It costs me a bit on my electric bill, but it's worth the peace of mind. When the bulb is lit, I never see that flicker. Everything looks normal, but if I ever turn it off at night, there's a chance I'll see that strange glow again. Just for a few seconds. It's enough to make my skin crawl. I can't explain it. I've stopped trying. I do my laundry during the day, take out my trash before sunset, and keep the corridor lit if I need to go back there after dark. I still feel uneasy about it. Sometimes I wonder if I'm imagining things, but I know what I've seen. I know there's something that shows up in that spot when it's dark, and I can't get rid of that thought. So for now, I live with it. I keep the light on, or I avoid the corridor at night. It's not perfect, but at least I don't have to see that flickering glow anymore. I still get tense whenever I step out there in the dark. I try not to think too much about it. I just move fast, do what I need to do, and go back inside. I don't know what else to do. That's the story so far. It's not dramatic or violent or anything like that. It's just unnerving. But that's enough to keep me on edge whenever I find myself standing alone in that corridor. I got home late one night and something caught my attention before I even turned on the living room light. I saw a faint outline through my glass door, like a shape against the backdrop of the city. I froze with my keys still in the lock. My chest felt tight, and my ears started buzzing. I thought I saw a person standing outside on the balcony, right against the railing. I'm on the 8th floor of an old building, and I've always felt safe up here. That night, I didn't feel safe at all. My apartment is small. There's a bedroom off to the side, a single bathroom, and a living room connected to a cramped kitchen. The balcony is attached to the living room, facing the street. The building is from the center. The hallways smell like old paint, and the walls have cracks and water stains. My place isn't fancy, but it's quiet most of the time. When I walked in that night, I had a stack of papers under my arm from work. My shirt was sticky with sweat because the elevator was on the fritz again, and I had to walk up 8 flights of stairs. I was tired and hungry, but the second I thought I saw someone on the balcony, all that fatigue vanished. I locked the door behind me. My heart was pounding in my ears. The room was dark, but the city lights outside were bright enough for me to see my couch and the edges of my small kitchen table. I dropped my papers on the table and turned on the lamp by the couch. The shape was gone. There was nobody outside. I stepped closer to the sliding glass door and peered outside. The city lights cast a weak glow on the railing, and I didn't see anyone. When I placed my hand on the door handle, I felt a vibration through the glass. I slid the door open, letting in a rush of cold air. I stepped onto the balcony, and I noticed that the metal bars were still trembling, like someone had been leaning on them a second earlier. I stood there staring down at the street. There were a few cars passing by, but nobody was standing on the sidewalk looking up. I looked left and right, and the balconies of the neighboring apartments were empty. My mouth felt dry, and I realized I was holding my breath. I finally exhaled and tested the railing by pushing against it. It gave a slight creak, but that's normal. The odd thing was how it kept vibrating for a few extra moments before stopping. I checked the corners. I looked up at the concrete overhang above, and I even scanned the underside of my own balcony. I saw nothing unusual. No ropes, no signs of someone climbing. Everything was still. I went back inside and locked the sliding door, tugging on it a few times to make sure it was secure. My stomach was growling, so I tried to refocus on my normal evening routine. I took off my shoes, left them by the front door, and opened my fridge. I grabbed some leftover pasta and tossed it in the microwave. I kept glancing at the balcony door. My appetite was fading, but I forced myself to eat. My arms felt tense. It was hard to relax. Finally, I turned on the TV to break the silence, but all I could think about was that strange outline and the vibrating metal. I thought maybe I was overtired or imagining things. I felt foolish. At around midnight, I decided to head to my bedroom. It's just a small room with a bed and a tiny closet. The walls are plain white, a bit discolored from age, and there's a single window that faces another building. I couldn't sleep well. I kept hearing faint noises from the living room. I got up a few times to check. Most of the time, it was just the sound of old pipes or the elevator creaking down the hall. Once I swore I heard a soft scraping noise coming from the balcony door. I stood there for a moment staring at the handle. I didn't see it move, but my heart was pounding. I pressed my ear against the glass. I heard the low hum of city traffic and maybe a quiet rustle. I couldn't tell. I finally went back to bed and tried to force my eyes shut. The next morning I left for work feeling uneasy, but nothing seemed out of place. I locked the door, checked the knob twice, and took the elevator down. I tried to put it out of my head, but later that day I caught myself staring at the office window, thinking about the balcony. That evening I felt a knot in my stomach on the drive home. When I arrived at my building, I didn't want to go upstairs. I felt an odd sense of dread, like stepping into a dark basement. Still, I forced myself into the elevator, feeling my chest tighten as I pressed the button for the 8th hall. When I got inside my apartment, everything was quiet. The balcony door was locked, and the lights were off. I flicked on the overhead lamp, and the living room looked exactly as I had left it. The tension in my shoulders eased a little. I changed into a t-shirt and sweatpants, then microwaved a frozen pizza. By the time I finished eating, I started to relax again. I told myself that maybe I just had a weird moment the night before. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a faint creaking noise. It wasn't loud, but it was rhythmic, like something shifting against metal. I felt my chest tighten. I sat up in bed, swinging my legs over the side. I listened, trying to pick out the direction of the sound. It was coming from the living room, near the balcony. I stood up, moving slowly, trying to be quiet. My heart was beating so hard that I felt lightheaded. I crept down the short hallway until I could see the glow of the city lights through the curtains. The sound got a little clearer, just a gentle squeak, like the railing was being pushed or pulled. I stared at the door, half expecting to see a silhouette outside. The living room was dark because I hadn't turned on the lamp. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I thought about flipping the switch, but I was afraid of drawing attention to myself. Instead, I inched closer to the glass door. I tried to look out from the side, but I couldn't make out anything beyond the reflection of my own face. The squeaking stopped. I stood still for a few seconds, holding my breath. Then I jumped back a little when I heard a soft tapping sound from the other side of the door, like fingertips on the glass. My stomach flipped, and my throat tightened. I wanted to run out of the apartment, but I also felt this need to check if someone was actually there. I grabbed a baseball bat that I keep in the bedroom closet. My hands were shaking. I slid 1 foot forward, trying to brace myself for something. The tapping stopped. I reached for the curtain and pulled it aside quickly. There was nothing there. The balcony looked empty. My mouth felt dry, and I noticed I was breathing in shallow gasps. I flicked on the living room light. The door was locked. I didn't see any scratches or marks. I slid the door open just a crack to look out. The wind blew in cold against my face. The empty railing was still. No one stood there. I closed it again, locked it, and decided to sit on the couch for a while. I left the light on and tried to watch some random late-night show, but I didn't pay attention. I stayed like that until dawn, then dragged myself to bed for an hour of restless sleep before my alarm went off. Over the next week, the same pattern continued. I'd get home, feel a brief sense of relief when I saw everything was normal, then wake up in the middle of the night to these subtle sounds coming from the balcony. Sometimes I heard the faint squeak of metal. Other times what sounded like soft steps, but every time I checked, there was nobody there. I started to get paranoid. I checked the door locks 3 times before bed. I put a chair against the door, which seemed pointless, but I did it anyway. I even thought about installing a camera, but I hesitated because it felt ridiculous. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. A few nights later, I was dozing off on the couch. The TV was on, but the sound was low. Around 3 in the morning, I jerked awake because I heard a distinct clang, like the railing was struck. My heart raced. I turned off the TV. In the sudden silence, I heard a scraping sound, like fingers sliding across the metal bars. I stood up, my legs unsteady. The living room light was still on, and I could see my own reflection in the glass door. I took 1 step toward it. My reflection moved, but behind it, I thought I saw the outline of a head and shoulders. I lunged for the switch and killed the light. When the inside lights went out, I stood there waiting for my eyes to adjust. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, trying to look outside. The city lights were not very bright, but they provided enough glow to see the railing. Again, I saw nothing. The sound had stopped. My jaw was clenched so tight that I felt pain in my temples. I was sweating and I could smell my own body odor. I felt a trickle of sweat down my back. I decided I'd had enough for one night. I grabbed a blanket from my bedroom, wrapped it around my shoulders, and sat on the floor in the hallway, away from the windows. I stayed there, leaning against the wall, with eyes wide open, for at least an hour. I was too scared to do anything else. The next day, I told my coworker that something strange was happening at my place. He asked me if I'd told building management. I shrugged and said no. I wasn't sure what to say. I think someone's standing on my balcony at night, except there's never anyone there. It sounded insane, but that night I heard the squeaking again around 1 a.m. This time, I didn't get up. I stayed in bed with the door closed, the covers pulled up to my chin. My pulse was racing, and I couldn't relax. I heard that soft creak, then silence. Eventually, I drifted off, but I woke up to the alarm feeling drained. Over the next few days, I tried to ignore the problem. I turned up the volume on the TV to drown out any sounds. If I heard a squeak, I'd pretend I didn't notice. I started feeling jumpy all the time. The building's elevator would make a harsh clank when it hit my floor, and I would flinch. The neighbor would drop something in the hallway, and I'd nearly jump out of my skin. My appetite got worse, and my stomach felt twisted. I barely slept more than a couple of hours each night. At one point, I considered moving out. I looked online for new apartments, but I couldn't afford the ones in safer, newer buildings. Plus, the hassle of packing and the cost of breaking my lease felt overwhelming. I told myself that maybe it would stop if I just kept ignoring it. Yet the nights dragged on, and the noises continued. There was never any clear sign of forced entry or damage to the balcony door, but almost every night I heard something out there. A bump, a scrape, a soft tapping that made my skin crawl. One night I decided to face it head on. It was around midnight when I first heard the faint squeak. I jumped off the couch, grabbed my phone, and walked to the door. I tried to steady my breathing. My hands were sweating, and the phone felt slippery. I yanked the curtain aside and saw only my reflection. I flipped off the light again, stared into the dark, and waited. The squeaking continued for a moment. My heart hammered in my chest. I slid the door open quickly and stepped onto the balcony. The cold air hit me. I looked around, but nothing was out of the ordinary. I walked to the railing and peered down at the street. A car passed by, and no one stood on the sidewalk. I gripped the railing. It was still. I waited there, shivering in my t-shirt and sweatpants. After a while, I gave up and went back inside. Now I've started to avoid looking outside at night. I keep the curtains drawn once the sun goes down. I keep the TV or radio on for background noise, but I still hear it. Some nights I catch a glimpse of movement through the slit in the curtains, just a momentary flicker. And when I pull the curtain all the way, there's nothing there. The hair on my arm stands up whenever I think about it. I've locked that door so many times, but I still feel like I'm not alone. I don't have an explanation. I haven't found any footprints or clues. Nobody else in the building has mentioned anything suspicious, and I haven't seen anyone climbing up or down. But I know what I hear, and I can't ignore the way the metal bars vibrate sometimes, as if a person just let go. The worst part is how my mind starts racing when it happens. My heart thuds, my breathing gets shallow, my forehead gets slick with sweat, my hands shake, and my stomach turns into knots. It's a physical reaction that I can't control. It feels like someone's staring at me with eyes I can't see. It's been weeks now. I don't sleep well, and I hate coming home late from work. Every time I put the key in my front door, I glance at the balcony. I'm scared I'll see a figure standing there waiting. We'll probably live with this tension until I can move somewhere else. But that might take a while. For now, I keep my baseball bat by the couch. I check the locks. I try to ignore the midnight creaks and tapping, but I'll never forget the first time I saw that outline in the dark. I still feel it in the pit of my stomach. Sometimes late at night I swear I sense eyes on me, even though nobody should be out there. And that's why I stopped looking. It's easier to pretend I'm alone, even when the night tells me I'm not. I can't handle standing at the glass door trying to see if someone's on the other side. I can't handle standing at the glass door trying to see if somebody's on the other side. I can't handle standing at the glass door trying to see if somebody's on the other side. I can't handle standing at the glass door trying to see if somebody's on the other side.